The scorching sun of Keras 9 beat down mercilessly on the huge metal platform where the auction was being held. Dust swirled through the air, coating everything in a fine layer of reddish-brown grime. The yard was packed with traders, mercenaries, and settlers from across 3 systems, all gathered for the annual military surplus sale. Draven Rule pulled his worn tactical scarf higher over his nose and mouth, squinting against the harsh light. His large frame moved with practiced efficiency through the crowd, shoulders hunched slightly forward, the permanent posture of a man who had spent too many years carrying heavy gear across battlefields. 15 years as a frontline infantryman had left their mark, not just in the scars that crisscrossed his weathered skin, but in the way his eyes constantly scanned for threats, never fully at rest. "Next up, Lot 42, bellowed the auctioneer, a bloated Traxian whose 6 arms gestured wildly at a covered cage being dragged into the center ring. "Military-grade battle mount, certified combat veteran." Draven hadn't come for a battle mount. He needed simple draft animals, something to help plow fields and haul supplies on the remote plot of land he'd claimed on the outer reaches of the settlement zone. A farming beast, not a war machine. But something about the cage caught his attention. The tarp was yanked away, revealing a creature unlike anything Draven had expected. Behind the reinforced bars lay what appeared to be a massive equine form, but no horse had ever evolved naturally to look like this. Its body was a patchwork of armor plating and raw flesh, with joints reinforced by metal components. 6 powerful legs ended in clawed feet designed for traction on any terrain. But it wasn't the alien physiology that made Draven pause. It was the creature's condition. The beast lay on its side, ribs showing through stretched skin. Deep wounds, some poorly healed and others still weeping, covered its flanks. One of its eyes was clouded over, likely blind, while the other, unnaturally bright and gold, stared at nothing. A metal plate was embedded in its skull, with ports and connection points that told the story of neural tampering. "This unit," continued the auctioneer, dropping his voice to sound more serious, "served in 3 major campaigns, officially designated as Object 42M, built for speed and aggression, perfect for security operations or high-risk transport." A murmur ran through the crowd. Even from where he stood, Draven could see the warning labels plastered across the cage. Danger, aggressive specimen, neural damage, deemed unsalvageable. The auctioneer sensed the crowd's hesitation. Yes, some cosmetic damage. Battle scars. Shows it survived combat, which means it's effective. He poked a long metal rod through the bars, jabbing at the creature. It didn't respond. Needs recalibration, but the base programming is solid. Who'll start the bidding at 500 credits? Silence fell over the yard. No one raised a hand. The creature in the cage didn't even flinch when poked again, harder this time. 400 then. These units cost 50,000 to engineer. You're getting military technology at scrap prices. Still no takers. Draven found himself moving closer, studying the beast more carefully. Past the wounds and modifications, there was something in its remaining good eye. A dullness that wasn't unconsciousness, but something worse. Recognition. This thing was aware of what was happening to it. 300! Come on, you vultures! 300 credits! Draven had seen that look before, in soldiers who'd been through too much, who'd lost the will to fight but couldn't find the permission to die. Last chance, 200 credits or it goes to the processing plant. The auctioneer was getting desperate, his multiple arms gesticulating wildly. The neural augments alone are worth 20 credits, Draven said, his voice rough from disuse. The crowd parted, heads turning to stare at him. The auctioneer blinked his 3 eyes in rapid succession. What did you say, human? I said 20 credits, Draven repeated, stepping forward. He could feel the stares burning into him from all sides. Laughter erupted across the yard. A tall, spindly alien to his left slapped its knee joints. The human wants to buy garbage. Perfect match. The auctioneer recovered quickly, flashing rows of needle-like teeth in what passed for a smile. My friend, perhaps you misunderstand. This is a military-grade battle mount. I understand exactly what it is, Draven replied, keeping his voice level, and I'm offering 20 credits. It's not worth my time to process the sale, the auctioneer sneered. Draven reached into his pocket and pulled out a small handful of credit chips, counting them slowly and deliberately. 23 credits then. That's my final offer. The auctioneer stared at him for a long moment, then burst out laughing again. Fine, sold to the crazy human. Maybe you can render it for parts. He waved dismissively. Next lot, tactical armor, only minor plasma damage. As the crowd's attention shifted to the new items being brought out, Driven approached the processing desk. A bored-looking administrator pushed a tablet toward him. Name for the transfer of ownership? Draven Rule. Purpose of acquisition? He paused. Agricultural assistance. The administrator looked up, one eyebrow raised. That's a Class 3 combat organism. It's not designed for... Just put agricultural assistance, Draven interrupted. The administrator shrugged and tapped at the screen. Your funeral, human. Sign here. Draven pressed his thumb against the scanner. Transport? I've got a hauler. 20 minutes later, Draven had maneuvered his beat-up transport vehicle to the loading dock. Two workers used electric prods to force the creature from its auction cage into the reinforced compartment at the back of Draven's hauler. The beast moved with obvious pain, but offered no resistance. As Draven prepared to leave, a small, rat-faced trader sidled up beside him. Made yourself a bargain, eh? Planning to salvage the tech? The trader's eyes gleamed with avarice. I'd give you 50 credits right now for just the neural interface. Draven's face remained impassive. Not for sale. 100 credits, final offer. Without responding, Draven climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The trader jumped back as the hauler's repulsors kicked in, lifting the vehicle a few feet off the ground. You're crazy, the trader called after him. That thing's more dead than alive. Draven didn't look back as he guided the hauler away from the auction yard. In the sealed compartment behind him, the creature lay motionless on the metal floor, its breathing shallow and labored. Through the internal camera, Draven studied it, the strange mix of biological and mechanical, of weapon and animal. Grim, he said aloud to himself. I'll call you Grim. The journey to Draven's homestead took nearly 5 hours, traversing rough terrain that gradually shifted from the dust plains near the settlement to the rockier foothills of the western ridge. His land sat in a small valley, sheltered somewhat from the worst of the dust storms that regularly swept the planet. A modest prefab shelter served as his living quarters, while an old military hangar, salvaged and rebuilt, stood nearby, originally intended to house equipment and livestock. Draven backed the hauler up to the hangar's entrance, then climbed down to unlock the heavy doors. Inside was mostly empty, save for some basic farming tools and a few storage containers. Along one wall, he'd constructed a basic stable area, anticipating the draft animals he'd planned to purchase. After securing the hangar doors open, he returned to the hauler and opened the rear compartment. The creature, Grim, hadn't moved during the journey. For a moment, Draven wondered if it had died en route. Come on, he said, not really expecting a response. Out. The creature's good eye opened, focusing on him with surprising clarity. There was no movement otherwise. Draven sighed. Have it your way. He climbed into the compartment, a dangerous move with any wild animal, let alone a military-bred battle mount. The creature tracked him with its eye but made no aggressive move. Up close, Draven could better see the extent of its injuries. Some were clearly from combat, laceration and burn marks consistent with weapons fire. Others were systematic, precise cuts where someone had operated, installed components, taken samples. And some were clearly from mistreatment. Lash marks, restraint abrasions, injection sites. Carefully, Draven placed a hand on the creature's flank. It flinched but remained still. I need to get you inside, he said quietly. Can you stand? For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, with obvious effort, the creature began to shift its weight. It struggled to coordinate its 6 limbs, rising shakily and nearly collapsing twice before managing to stand. Draven stepped back, giving it space, and backed out of the compartment. The creature followed with halting steps, its metal-reinforced hooves clanging against the ramp. By the time it reached the bottom, it was trembling from exertion. Draven led the way to the hangar, walking slowly. The creature followed at a distance, stopping frequently to catch its breath. The journey of 30 yards took nearly 10 minutes. Inside the hangar, Draven had prepared a simple enclosure. Nothing that would hold a determined military mount for long, but enough to provide structure. He'd filled a trough with water and placed some synthetic feed in a bin. Not ideal, but he had no idea what the creature's nutritional requirements might be. The beast stopped at the entrance to the enclosure, its good eye darting between Draven and the setup within. "It's the best I can offer right now," Draven said. "Go on." Grim limped inside, immediately collapsing in the far corner, as far from Draven as possible. Its sides heaved with exertion. Draven closed the gate but didn't lock it. "I'll be back in the morning," he said, then turned and left the hangar, sealing the doors behind him. That night, as Draven lay on his cot in the prefab shelter, he questioned his own sanity. What had possessed him to buy a half-dead military mount? He was no veterinarian, had no experience with bioengineered organisms, and certainly couldn't afford proper care for such a creature. His plan had been simple: buy draft animals, restore the land, grow crops, live quietly. This unexpected complication threatened the fragile financial calculations that had brought him to this remote place. Yet sleep eluded him as his mind kept returning to that dull gold eye. The recognition in it, the resignation. Morning brought the sound of crashing from the hangar. Draven bolted upright, grabbing the hunting knife he kept beside his cot. He rushed outside, still pulling on his shirt, and approached the hangar cautiously. The crashing continued, metal against metal, punctuated by what could only be described as roars. Draven cracked the door open and peered inside. The creature was fully awake now, ramming itself against the enclosure walls, its powerful legs kicking out at the metal panels. As Draven watched, it reared up on its four back legs, bringing its front limbs down against the top rail with enough force to bend the metal. "Hey!" Draven shouted instinctively. The creature whirled toward him with surprising speed, its good eye wide and wild. A harsh, screaming sound emanated from somewhere in its throat, a sound no natural animal could make. It charged at the enclosure gate, hitting it with enough force to warp the frame. Draven stood his ground, though every instinct screamed at him to run. He'd seen this behavior before. The delayed response to trauma. The fight that comes after the shock wears off. He kept his voice steady. "You're not a prisoner," he said, "but you'll kill yourself carrying on like this." The creature screamed again, throwing itself at the wall nearest to Draven. Blood was now visible on its flanks where old wounds had reopened. "Your choice," Draven said simply. "Fight until you're dead, or calm down and heal. No one's forcing you either way." He turned and walked to the far end of the hangar, keeping his back to the raging beast in a deliberate show of either trust or foolishness. At a workbench, he began sorting through basic tools, organizing them methodically while the crashing and roaring continued behind him. For nearly an hour, the creature raged. Gradually, the intervals between impacts grew longer. The screams became less frequent. Eventually, silence fell. Draven turned to find the beast standing motionless in the enclosure, sides heaving, fresh blood staining its patchwork hide. Its good eye was fixed on him with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. Slowly, deliberately, Draven filled a bucket with clean water from a barrel. He approached the enclosure, stopping a few feet away. The creature watched his every move but made no aggressive gestures. "Water," Draven said, placing the bucket within reach of the gate. "Food's in the trough. Rest is up to you." He returned to the workbench and continued organizing. Behind him, he heard the soft sound of movement, then water being lapped up. He didn't turn around, giving the creature its privacy. Later, as Draven prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "You're not a slave," he said quietly, "but if you want to live, you need to learn to breathe again." He couldn't be sure if the creature understood his words, but as he closed the door, he saw it watching him with that same intense gaze. Days passed in a similar pattern. Each morning, Draven would enter the hangar to find Grim had destroyed something during the night. Bent metal, torn bedding, scattered feed. Each day, Draven would calmly clean up, repair what was damaged, and go about his business, speaking occasionally to the creature, but never demanding a response. By the 5th day, the destruction had lessened. By the 10th, it had stopped altogether. The creature remained wary, keeping its distance, but it no longer thrashed against the enclosure when Draven approached. On the 12th day, Draven arrived to find Grim standing at the gate, waiting. Its posture was different, head slightly lowered, but not in submission, more like cautious observation. "Morning," Draven said as he'd taken to doing. He set down the bucket of fresh water and the new feed mix he'd obtained from a trader who specialized in military supplies. Instead of backing away as usual, Grim remained at the gate. Draven could hear a low hum coming from the neural augments embedded in the creature's skull. a sound he'd come to recognize as increased processing activity. Carefully, moving slowly, Driven extended his hand toward the gate. Grim stiffened but didn't retreat. They stood like that, hands width apart for nearly a minute. Then deliberately, Grim extended its head and touched its muzzle to Draven's fingertips. The contact lasted only a second before Grim withdrew, backing to the far side of the enclosure. But something had changed. A boundary had been crossed. That afternoon, as Driven worked on reinforcing the hangar's roof before the coming storm season, a tremendous crack of thunder rolled across the valley. The first heavy rains of the year were approaching, a dangerous time on Karas 9, when flash floods could sweep down from the higher elevations with little warning. Driven hurried to secure the last of the roofing panels. The wind was picking up rapidly, driving dust and debris before the rain. As he hammered the final fasteners into place, a particularly violent gust caught the edge of an unsecured panel, tearing it free and sending it flying. Driven lunged for it, missed, and lost his balance. He fell hard against the roof edge, then slipped, tumbling toward the ground 12 feet below. His fall was broken by a storage container, which likely saved him from a broken neck, but did nothing for his left arm. Pain shot through him as he landed, the distinct snap of breaking bone audible even over the howling wind. Cursing through gritted teeth, Driven tried to stand, only to collapse as a wave of dizziness swept over him. The storm was nearly upon them now. Dark clouds churned overhead, and the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Driven needed to get inside, but his body wasn't cooperating. Blood ran into his eyes from a cut on his forehead, and his broken arm hung useless at his side. A crash from within the hangar caught his attention. Through pain-blurred vision, Driven saw the hangar doors burst open. Grim stood in the doorway, having somehow broken free of the enclosure. For a moment, both man and beast were motionless, staring at each other across the windswept yard. Then Grim charged, not away toward freedom, but straight toward Driven. Some distant part of his mind noted the irony, saved from the fall only to be trampled by the very creature he'd tried to save. But instead of attacking, Grim skidded to a stop beside him. The beast lowered itself awkwardly, presenting its side to Driven like a mount waiting for its rider. Driven hesitated, then understood. With his good arm, he grabbed onto the natural handholds created by Grim's armored plates and pulled himself onto the creature's back. As soon as he was secure, Grim rose and turned toward the prefab shelter, moving with surprising gentleness given its bulk. They reached the shelter just as the full force of the storm hit. Rain lashed down in sheets, turning the ground to mud within seconds. Driven slid from Grim's back at the shelter door, fumbling, with the controls to open it. Inside, he collapsed onto his cot, the pain in his arm now a pulsing agony. He expected Grim to return to the hangar. The shelter was barely large enough for Driven himself, let alone a creature of Grim's size. Instead, the beast forced its way through the doorway, folding its limbs carefully to fit in the confined space. It settled near the door, positioning itself between Driven and the storm raging outside. Through the haze of pain, Driven met Grim's gaze. "Thank you," he managed. The creature made a low sound in its throat, not the harsh scream from before, but something softer, almost a purr. That night, as the storm battered the small shelter and Driven drifted in and out of consciousness, Grim maintained its vigil. Twice, when Driven woke shouting from pain-induced nightmares, he found the creature's head resting gently against his good arm, a solid presence anchoring him to reality. By morning, the worst of the storm had passed. Driven's arm needed proper medical attention, but the nearest clinic was hours away. He fashioned a crude splint and sling from materials in his emergency kit, swallowed some pain medication, and prepared to make the journey. Grim watched these preparations intently. When Driven stepped outside to check the hauler for damage, the creature followed, staying close as if anticipating another fall. The hauler had weathered the storm reasonably well, but one of the repulsor units had been damaged by flying debris. It would run, but not smoothly. Driven climbed in awkwardly, favoring his injured arm. Before he could close the door, Grim approached, nudging against his leg. "I need to get this looked at," Driven explained, gesturing to his arm. "You stay here. I'll be back." Grim made that purring sound again, then backed away, allowing Driven to close the door. As the hauler's engines sputtered to life, Driven watched through the view screen as Grim returned to the hangar, moving with purpose rather than the defeated shuffle of before. The trip to the clinic took longer than expected. The storm had washed out portions of the trail, forcing detours through rougher terrain. By the time Driven returned, arm properly set and wrapped, night had fallen again. He was exhausted, the pain medication wearing off, and deeply concerned about what he might find at the homestead. Would Grim have seized the opportunity to escape? The logical part of Draven's mind said it should. What reason did it have to stay? Yet as he approached the darkened buildings, he found himself hoping otherwise. The hangar doors were closed, just as he'd left them. Draven's heart sank. He parked the hauler and made his way to the prefab shelter, too tired to check the hangar tonight. Tomorrow would be soon enough to confirm what he already suspected. He palmed the door control and stepped inside, then froze. Grim was there, curled in the same spot as the night before. The creature raised its head at Draven's entrance, that single golden eye gleaming in the darkness. "You stayed," Draven said, unable to keep the surprise from his voice. Grim rose and moved toward him, stopping just short of contact. It lowered its head, then gently touched its muzzle to Draven's injured arm, as if checking the repair. Something tight in Draven's chest loosened. He reached out with his good hand, and for the first time, deliberately touched the creature's head, running his fingers along the space between metal implants and organic tissue. "Thank you," he said again. That night marked another boundary crossed. Grim didn't return to the hangar, but remained in the shelter with Draven. And in the days that followed, as Draven's arm slowly healed, a new routine emerged. They were no longer captor and captive, no longer even rescuer and rescued. They were something else. Two damaged veterans finding in each other's presence a kind of peace neither had known before. The training, when it finally began, was unlike anything traditional handlers would recognize. Draven never used commands, never punished, never rewarded. Instead, he simply lived alongside Grim, demonstrating rather than instructing. When Draven needed to move heavy objects, he would start the task himself. Invariably, Grim would approach and position itself to assist. When navigating the rocky terrain beyond the homestead, Draven would pick a path carefully and Grim would observe, then begin to identify similar paths on its own. The neural augments that had been installed to make Grim obey commands were now serving a different purpose. The creature was learning, adapting, not to follow orders, but to collaborate. It began anticipating needs, solving problems Draven hadn't even recognized yet. During one expedition to gather construction materials from an abandoned outpost, they encountered a deep ravine blocking their path. Draven prepared to turn back and find another route, but Grim moved ahead, carefully testing the ground along the edge. It located a narrow section where the gap was smallest, then positioned itself and looked expectantly at Draven. Confused at first, Draven watched as Grim made a small leaping motion, then looked at him again. Understanding dawned. Draven approached, and with careful coordination, mounted Grim's back. The creature gathered itself, then launched across the ravine in a powerful leap that carried them safely to the other side. As they continued their journey, Draven found himself grinning. Grim hadn't just learned to jump on command, it had assessed the obstacle, determined a solution, and communicated its plan. This was far beyond the programming of a battle mount. With each passing week, Grim's physical condition improved. The wounds healed, muscle rebuilt over the emaciated frame, and a healthy sheen returned to its hide. The metal components that had once seemed grotesque began to integrate more naturally with the biological systems, as if Grim's body was finally accepting the modifications that had been forced upon it. 3 months after the auction, Draven decided it was time for a test. He led Grim to the hangar, which now served more as a workspace than a stable. Inside, he went to a storage locker that had remained locked since their arrival. Grim watched curiously as Draven keyed in the access code and opened the heavy door. Inside was a collection of items Draven had hoped never to use again. Military gear from his years of service. He reached past the weapons and tactical equipment to a simple object at the back, a control collar, standard issue for handlers of military mounts. Draven turned to Grim, holding the collar. "You know what this is," he said. It wasn't a question. Grim's eye fixed on the collar, and a visible shudder ran through its massive frame. The neural augments hummed louder, and for a moment, Draven thought he'd made a terrible mistake. But he needed to know. He approached slowly, collar extended. Grim backed away one step, then stopped, trembling slightly but holding its ground. "It's your choice," Draven said quietly. "Always your choice." For several long moments, neither moved. Then, with deliberate slowness, Grim lowered its head, presenting the neural ports on its skull, the connection points designed to interface with the control system. Draven stepped forward and just as slowly placed the collar against those ports. He felt the magnetic locks engage, heard the soft click as connections were established. Grim's entire body went rigid. The collar's display lit up, showing status indicators and command options. Connection successful. Neural interface active. Awaiting input. Draven took a deep breath, then pressed the central control, the override that would force compliance with his next command. The display changed. Total control enabled. Grim, Draven said firmly. Lie down. The creature remained standing, its eye fixed on Draven with the same intelligence as before. Lie down, Draven repeated louder. Still no response. According to the collar's display, the command had been transmitted. The neural augments were active, but Grim was ignoring it. A slow smile spread across Draven's face. He reached up and deactivated the collar, removing it completely. You've overwritten their programming, he said, a note of wonder in his voice. They can't control you anymore. Grim made a soft, nickering sound, then deliberately nudged Draven's chest with its muzzle, nearly knocking him over. It was the closest thing to laughter Draven had seen from the creature. He tossed the collar back into the locker and slammed it shut. Let's go for a run, he suggested. They left the hangar together and headed toward the open plains that stretched beyond the homestead. At the boundary of the property, Draven stopped. Grim continued a few paces, then turned back, questioning. Go on, Draven said, gesturing to the vast expanse before them. You're free. Show me what you can do when no one's holding you back. Understanding dawned in Grim's eye. The creature turned to face the plains, raised its head to scent the wind, then launched forward. Its 6 legs found a rhythm that ate up the ground at incredible speed. Not the controlled pace of a military mount in formation, but the joyful gallop of a creature rediscovering its power. Draven watched as Grim ran, its form growing smaller with distance, but never disappearing from view. It ran in great looping patterns, kicking up dust and debris, leaping over obstacles for the sheer pleasure of feeling its body work as intended. And then, just as Draven was beginning to wonder if Grim would return, the creature turned and raced back toward him, slowing as it approached to stop just a few feet away. Its sides heaved with exertion, but its eye was bright with something Draven had never seen there before. Joy. Better? Draven asked. Grim snorted, pawing at the ground with one massive foot. Good, Draven said, smiling. Tomorrow we'll go together. Life on the frontier of a colony world was never easy, but with Grim's help, the homestead began to thrive. They cleared fields for planting, constructed better shelters, and even built a rudimentary irrigation system to capture the seasonal rains. Draven's original plan for a simple farming operation expanded as they discovered their complementary abilities. Grim proved to have senses far beyond human capability, able to detect changes in the air that preceded storms, identify mineral deposits below the surface, and sense approaching wildlife long before Draven could see or hear anything. These abilities, originally engineered for combat applications, found new purpose in their peaceful existence. One evening, as they returned from a day spent constructing a new storage building, Draven noticed something unusual. Grim had stopped at the crest of a small rise, its attention fixed on a point in the darkening sky. A low rumble emanated from deep in its chest, not quite a growl, but a sound of alert. What is it? Draven asked, shading his eyes to look where Grim was focused. At first he saw nothing. Then a tiny speck resolved itself, moving too steadily to be a bird, too small to be an aircraft. It drew closer, and recognition dawned. A reconnaissance drone, military grade, its optical sensors sweeping the terrain in regular patterns. Grim's rumble grew louder. Without warning, the creature dropped into a crouch, then launched itself skyward in a leap that seemed to defy physics. Its front claws extended, catching the drone in midair and dragging it down. They landed heavily, Grim crushing the device beneath its feet with precise strikes. But it was too late. As the drone systems failed, a final transmission pulse flared. Data sent back to its control point. Coordinates, confirmation. Draven knelt beside the wreckage, examining the military markings. Colonial, Defense Force, he muttered. They found us. Grim nudged the destroyed drone with one foot, then looked questioningly at Draven. It's not good, Draven explained. gathering the larger pieces of debris. That was tagged with military reconnaissance codes. They were looking for something specific. He met Grimm's gaze. Looking for you. The implications were clear. Object 42M had been written off as unsalvageable, sold as scrap to be disposed of or harvested for parts. The fact that it was not only alive but thriving would be of great interest to the military that had invested so heavily in its creation. That night, Driven secured the homestead as best he could, though he harbored no illusions about their ability to withstand a military retrieval team if one was sent. Grimm seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, maintaining a vigilant watch from the doorway of the shelter. 3 days passed without incident. Driven began to hope that perhaps the drone had been part of a routine survey, its discovery of them coincidental rather than targeted. That hope died on the fourth morning with the arrival of a communication alert on the emergency transponder he kept for colony-wide announcements. The message was brief and to the point. Colonel Thaddeus Rowan, Colonial Defense Force, to former Sergeant Draven Rule. Presence requested at Regional Command 0900 tomorrow. Transportation provided. Compliance expected. Draven recognized the name immediately. Colonel Rowan had been his commanding officer during his final deployment, a harsh, efficient man who viewed soldiers and equipment with the same calculating eye. If he was personally involved, the situation was serious indeed. "We have a problem," Draven told Grimm, showing the creature the message as if it could read. Perhaps it could. Its neural augments were designed to process battlefield data after all. "They're not asking, they're telling." Grimm made a harsh sound, somewhere between a snort and a growl. "I know," Draven agreed, "but we don't have many options. If we run, they'll track us. If we fight," he shook his head, "there's too many of them, and I don't want to go back to that life." They spent the day in preparations, though for what, Draven wasn't entirely sure. Running seemed futile, fighting suicidal, compliance dangerous. By evening, he had settled on a plan that was simple but risky. He would go alone to meet the colonel, while Grimm remained hidden in the hills beyond the homestead. If Draven didn't return within 2 days, Grimm would flee into the uncharted territories to the north, where even military tracking systems struggled with the dense mineral deposits. He explained this plan to Grimm as they sat outside watching the sunset. The creature listened with apparent understanding, occasionally making small sounds of disagreement. "I don't like it either," Draven admitted, "but it's our best chance. They have no legal claim on you. I have the transfer, documents, but military necessity can override civilian ownership if they push hard enough." Grimm nudged Draven's shoulder, then rose and walked a short distance away. It turned back, made a beckoning motion with its head, then continued walking. After a moment, Draven followed. They traveled for about half a mile into a narrow ravine that Grimm had discovered during one of its exploratory runs. The creature led the way to a spot where the ravine widened into a small sheltered hollow, hidden from aerial observation by overhanging rock. Here, Draven was surprised to see that Grimm had been busy. A crude shelter had been constructed from fallen branches and debris, and a small cache of supplies had been gathered. "You've been planning," Draven said, amazed. "How long have you been working on this?" Grimm didn't answer, of course, but the implication was clear. The creature had recognized the precariousness of their situation long before the drone appeared. It had prepared a fallback position just in case. Draven surveyed the hidden camp with newfound respect. "Smart," he acknowledged. "This is where you'll wait while I go to the meeting? If anything goes wrong..." Grimm interrupted with a sharp snort, shaking its head vigorously. "What? You don't agree with the plan?" The creature made a series of gestures, pointing with its muzzle toward Draven, then itself, then making a unified movement with both front feet together. "You want us to go together?" Draven interpreted. "That's too dangerous. They want you, not me." Grimm repeated the gesture, more emphatically. Draven sighed, recognizing the familiar stubbornness. "Let me think about it. We have until morning to decide." The military transport arrived precisely at dawn, a sleek, armored vehicle that settled onto the open ground near the homestead with barely a sound. Its hatch opened to reveal 2 armed soldiers in full combat gear, their faces obscured by tactical helmets. "Sergeant Rule," one called out, "your presence is required at Regional Command." Draven emerged from the shelter, dressed in his old military jacket out of habit or perhaps defiance. "It's just Draven now," he corrected. "I'm not in the service anymore." The soldiers exchanged glances but didn't comment. Are you ready to depart, sir? Almost. Draven turned back toward the shelter. I'm bringing a companion. Before the soldiers could object, Grim appeared in the doorway. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Both soldiers raised their weapons, stepping back in alarm. Stand down, Draven ordered sharply. It's under control. Sir, we were not informed of that, the lead soldier stammered. Our orders are to escort you only. Then your orders are incomplete, Draven replied calmly. I go with my partner, or I don't go at all. The soldiers conferred briefly over their comm systems, then reluctantly lowered their weapons. The colonel will be informed of this development, the lead soldier said, stiffly. Please board the transport. The journey to regional command took less than an hour. Grim sat quietly beside Draven in the passenger compartment, ignoring the nervous glances from the soldiers seated across from them. Draven maintained a stoic expression, but internally he was running through scenarios, trying to anticipate what Rowan might want, and how far he was willing to go to get it. Regional Command was an imposing structure of reinforced concrete and metal, designed to withstand both a harsh environment and potential attacks. As the transport settled onto the landing pad, Draven placed a reassuring hand on Grim's neck. Let me do the talking, he said quietly, and whatever happens, remember, you're not what they made you anymore. They were escorted through a series of security checkpoints, each more stringent than the last. Grim's presence caused a stir among the personnel, with conversations stopping mid-sentence and eyes following their progress. Finally, they reached a large conference room where Colonel Thaddeus Rowan waited, standing at the head of a long table. Time had not softened the colonel's appearance. His face was still all hard angles and deep lines, his posture rigid with military precision. His eyes, cold blue and calculating, fixed first on Draven, then shifted to Grim with obvious interest. Sergeant Rule, Rowan said by way of greeting, you've brought an unexpected guest. Not a guest, Draven corrected. A partner. And it's just Draven now, Colonel. Rowan's expression didn't change. Of course. Please sit. He gestured to the chairs arranged around the table. Draven took a seat while Grim remained standing beside him, too large for the human-sized furniture. The colonel resumed his own place at the head of the table, a position of authority by design. I'll come directly to the point, Rowan said. Our reconnaissance systems detected an anomaly in your sector 3 months ago, a neural signature that should not exist. Object 42M was decommissioned and sold for parts after being deemed unsalvageable. Yet here it stands, apparently functional. He leaned forward slightly. How did you accomplish this? I didn't, Draven replied honestly. Grim recovered on his own. Grim? Rowan raised an eyebrow. You name military hardware? I named a living being who has the right to an identity beyond a serial number. The colonel's mouth tightened. Sergeant, Draven, let's be clear. That creature represents millions in military investment. Its neural framework alone cost more than you'd earn in 20 lifetimes. It was designed as a weapon system, not a pet. Draven felt Grim tense beside him, but kept his own expression neutral. What exactly do you want, Colonel? Rowan steepled his fingers. The Defense Force is interested in understanding how a supposedly terminal case has not only survived, but appears to be thriving. Our bioengineering division has questions that only a full examination can answer. You want to take him apart, Draven translated, his voice hardening. We want to understand, Rowan corrected smoothly. And yes, that would require extensive testing, but the knowledge gained could improve survival rates among other units. Surely you can see the value in that? Draven felt a cold anger building in his chest. I see a military that discarded a living being when it was no longer useful, then suddenly became interested again when it proved resilient enough to survive. Grim isn't going back to your labs. The colonel's face remained impassive, but his eyes hardened. I'm afraid this isn't a request, Draven. Object 42M is military property, regardless of whatever transfer documents you received at that auction. National security provisions allow us to reclaim strategic assets under certain conditions. And what conditions would those be? Functionality beyond expected parameters, Rowan replied promptly. That creature was sold as non-functional salvage. The fact that it's operational changes its classification. Draven leaned forward. So because he didn't die as expected, you get to take him back? That's convenient. It's the law, Rowan said simply. However, I'm authorized to offer you compensation for your investment. 10,000 credits should be more than adequate, considering your original purchase price." He smiled thinly. "The Defense Force can be generous when it chooses. And if I refuse?" The smile vanished. "Then we take the asset by force, and you face charges for interfering with military operations. Your service record has protected you thus far, but my patience has limits." The threat hung in the air between them. Driven glanced at Grimm, who had remained unnaturally still throughout the conversation, its golden eye fixed on Rowan with unnerving intensity. "I have an alternative proposal," Driven said finally. "A demonstration." Rowan frowned. "What kind of demonstration?" "You want proof that Grimm is more than a weapon, that he's developed beyond his programming?" "Let us show you." Driven leaned back, projecting a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Set up a challenge, whatever you want. If Grimm passes, you acknowledge his autonomy and our right to live in peace. And if it fails, then you get what you want. No resistance, no charges." The colonel considered this for a long moment, his eyes calculating. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. A demonstration. Tomorrow morning, 0800 at the training grounds." He rose, indicating the meeting was over. "I should warn you, I won't make this easy." "I wouldn't expect you to," Driven replied, standing as well. "But remember, Colonel, you're not testing a weapon anymore. You're testing something that has learned to think for itself." As they were escorted back to temporary quarters assigned for the night, Driven wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. He had no way of knowing what challenge Rowan would devise. No guarantee that Grimm could meet it. But the alternative, immediate surrender or hopeless resistance, had been unacceptable. In their assigned room, a sparse, utilitarian space with minimal furnishings, Driven sat heavily on the narrow bed. Grimm paced the confined space, clearly agitated. "I know," Driven said quietly. "It was a gamble, but it buys us time, and it gives us a chance, however small." Grimm stopped pacing and turned to face him, its eye questioning. "He'll make it combat," Driven predicted. "That's what you were designed for, what they expect. They'll pit you against something they think you can't beat without reverting to your original programming." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "The question is, what exactly are they testing for? To see if you'll obey commands? Or to see if you'll kill?" Grimm made a soft sound, then moved to stand directly in front of Draven. It lowered its head until they were eye to eye, then deliberately pressed its forehead against Draven's, a gesture of trust they had developed over their months together. "Yeah," Draven said, understanding the message. "We'll figure it out together. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it on our terms, not theirs." The training grounds were a sprawling complex of obstacle courses, firing ranges, and combat arenas designed to prepare soldiers and equipment for the rigors of frontier warfare. As Draven and Grimm were led through the facility, they passed groups of recruits running drills, technicians working on vehicles, and officers observing from elevated platforms. Their destination was a large circular arena at the center of the complex. Its walls rose 20 feet high, topped with observation platforms where a small crowd had already gathered. Officers in formal uniforms, technicians in lab coats, and security personnel in tactical gear. At the far end of the arena, a set of heavy doors was built into the wall, clearly designed to admit combatants or obstacles. Colonel Rowan awaited them at the arena entrance, accompanied by a team of specialists carrying various equipment. "Good morning, Driven," Rowan greeted, his tone professionally neutral. "I trust you rested well?" "Well enough," Driven replied. "What's the challenge?" Rowan gestured to the specialists. "First, we need to establish a baseline. These technicians will attach monitoring devices to your partner. Standard neural activity sensors. Nothing invasive." Driven looked to Grimm, who gave a small nod of acceptance. The technicians approached cautiously, attaching small devices to various points on Grimm's body, focusing particularly on the existing neural ports in its skull. Grimm remained perfectly still during the process, though Driven could sense its discomfort at being handled by strangers. "The challenge is simple," Rowan explained when the technicians had finished. "Object 42M will face 3 combat-ready units in sequence. No weapons, no assistance from you. The goal is survival, not necessarily victory." "3 against 1? Draven protested. "That's not a fair test." "Fair isn't the point," Rowan replied coldly. "Effectiveness is. If your claims about its evolved capabilities are true, then it should be able to adapt to unfavorable odds. Before Draven could argue further, one of the technicians approached with a final device, a neural command collar similar to the one Draven had tested months ago. "This is unnecessary," Draven said firmly, stepping between the technician and Grim. "It's non-negotiable," Rowan countered. "The collar won't be activated unless the situation becomes dangerous. Think of it as a safety measure." Draven turned to Grim, who was watching the exchange intently. "Your choice," he said quietly. "We can still walk away, try to find another solution." Grim considered for a moment, then deliberately lowered its head, presenting the neural ports just as it had done during Draven's test. The message was clear. It would accept the collar, knowing it could resist its commands if necessary. The technician stepped forward and attached the collar. Immediately, data began flowing to their monitoring equipment. "Fascinating," one of them murmured. "The neural pathways show significant reconfiguration. It's nothing like the original architecture." "Save your analysis for after the test," Rowan interrupted. He turned to Draven. "You'll observe from the command platform. Your partner enters alone." Draven placed a hand on Grim's neck. "Remember what we've learned," he said. "You're not what they think you are. Trust your instincts." Grim made a soft, nickering sound, then turned toward the arena entrance with determined steps. As the heavy gate rolled open, it walked through without hesitation, head held high. Draven was escorted to the observation platform where Rowan and his staff had gathered. From this vantage point, he could see the entire arena, a barren expanse of packed earth with scattered obstacles providing minimal cover. Grim stood at the center, turning slowly to survey the space, its movements calm and deliberate. "Beginning test phase 1, an announcer's voice echoed through the facility. "Releasing Combat Unit Alpha." The heavy doors at the far end of the arena ground open. From the shadowy interior emerged a creature similar to Grim in basic form, but larger and more heavily armored. Where Grim's modifications seemed designed for speed and endurance, this unit was built for raw power. Its limbs reinforced with thick plates, its head protected by a reinforced helmet that left only its eyes visible. "Combat Unit Alpha," Rowan narrated. "Latest generation heavy assault mount. It has one primary directive: eliminate any opposing force." The unit advanced into the arena, its movements mechanical and precise. It spotted Grim immediately, lowering its head in a threatening posture. A low electronic growl emanated from its throat, an artificially enhanced intimidation tactic. Grim remained motionless, watching the approaching threat with calculated interest rather than fear. When Alpha was approximately 20 yards away, it charged with surprising speed for its bulk, clearly intending to overwhelm Grim with a direct assault. At the last possible moment, Grim sidestepped, not retreating, but pivoting just enough that Alpha's charge missed by inches. As the larger creature thundered past, Grim spun and struck out with one clawed foot, catching the back of Alpha's leg at a vulnerable joint. Alpha stumbled but quickly recovered, wheeling around for another attack. This time it approached more cautiously, circling to keep Grim contained against one section of the arena wall. Draven watched, tension building in his chest. Grim was outmatched in terms of raw strength. A direct confrontation would end poorly. But what the observers couldn't see, what they didn't understand, was that Grim was analyzing, learning with each exchange. The two creatures circled each other, feinting and retreating. Alpha grew increasingly aggressive, frustrated by its inability to land a decisive blow. It began using the full weight of its body, charging and then pivoting to slam its armored flank against Grim. One such attack connected solidly, sending Grim sprawling across the arena floor. A murmur ran through the observers as Alpha pressed its advantage, charging the downed opponent. But instead of trying to rise, Grim rolled directly into Alpha's path, positioning itself beneath the charging beast. As Alpha thundered overhead, Grim struck upward with all 6 limbs, catching the exposed underbelly where the armor was thinnest. The impact lifted Alpha partially off the ground, disrupting its charge and sending it crashing down in an ungainly heap. Before it could recover, Grim was on its feet, circling to position itself near one of the arena obstacles, a concrete barrier about 4 feet high. Alpha shook itself and charged again, enraged. Grim waited until the last moment, then leapt onto the barrier, using it as a springboard to launch over Alpha's head. As it sailed overhead, it struck downward at Alpha's exposed neck, not with enough force to kill, but precisely targeted to stun. Alpha staggered, momentarily disoriented. Grim landed behind it and immediately charged, hitting the larger creature's back legs with enough force to buckle its knees. Alpha went down hard, and before it could rise, Grim was atop it, 1 foot positioned precisely at the junction of head and neck, the kill position. But Grim didn't strike the killing blow. Instead, it maintained the position, clearly demonstrating dominance while refraining from unnecessary violence. After several tense seconds, Alpha went limp in submission. "Remarkable," one of the technicians muttered. "It used tactics rather than brute force, and it showed restraint at the moment of victory." Rowan's face remained impassive, but Driven could see calculation in his eyes. "Proceed to Phase 2, he ordered. Alpha was withdrawn from the arena, leaving Grim alone once more. There was no break, no time to recover. Almost immediately, the announcement came. Releasing combat units Beta and Gamma simultaneously. The doors opened again, and 2 new opponents emerged. These were different from Alpha. Smaller, faster, with whip-like tails ending in metallic barbs. They moved in perfect synchronization, clearly programmed to operate as a team. "Reconnaissance units," Rowan explained, "designed to work in tandem. One distracts while the other attacks from the flank or rear." The 2 units spread out, approaching Grim from different angles. Their movements were fluid and unpredictable, darting forward to feign an attack, then retreating before Grim could respond. They were testing defenses, looking for weaknesses. Grim remained at the center of the arena, turning slowly to keep both opponents in view. Unlike its first encounter, there was no opportunity to focus on a single threat. Dividing attention meant vulnerability. The first coordinated attack came swiftly. Beta darted forward from the front, while Gamma circled to the rear. Grim reacted by backing toward one of the arena walls, eliminating the threat from behind but potentially limiting maneuverability. Beta lunged, its barbed tail whipping forward like a scorpion's sting. Grim deflected the strike with an armored foreleg, but this left its flank exposed to Gamma, which had circled back into view. The second unit's attack landed, its barbs tearing a gash along Grim's side. Draven gripped the railing of the observation platform, knuckles white. "This isn't a fair test," he protested. "You're not measuring adaptability. You're seeing if it can be overwhelmed." "War isn't fair," Rowan replied coldly. "If your partner truly has evolved beyond its programming, let's see how it handles multiple threats." Down in the arena, Grim was learning quickly. After the initial successful attack, Beta and Gamma attempted to repeat their strategy, but Grim was no longer playing defensively. Instead of retreating to the wall, it charged directly at Beta, forcing the unit to abandon its attack and dodge. This disrupted the coordination between the 2 units, creating a momentary opening. Grim seized the advantage, spinning to face Gamma as it attempted to reposition. With a powerful leap, Grim landed directly in Gamma's path, then lashed out with both front feet in a devastating combination that sent the smaller unit tumbling across the arena floor. Beta, seeing its partner vulnerable, rushed to assist. But rather than engaging directly, Grim retreated, drawing both units toward a collection of obstacles in one corner of the arena. The space was tight, negating the advantage of numbers and coordinated attacks. What followed was a masterful display of tactical thinking. Grim used the environment to separate the 2 units, forcing them to attack one at a time through the narrow spaces between obstacles. When one would lunge, Grim would counter, then immediately reposition for the next attack. Beta, the more aggressive of the pair, overextended during one such exchange. Grim seized the opportunity, catching the unit's tail mid-strike and using the momentum to slam it against a concrete barrier. The impact stunned Beta, leaving it temporarily vulnerable. Instead of pressing the advantage to eliminate Beta, Grim quickly turned to face Gamma, which was attempting to circle around the obstacle field. Anticipating its path, Grim leapt over a low barrier, intercepting Gamma with surprising speed. The collision sent both creatures rolling across the arena floor in a tangle of limbs and tails. When they separated, Gamma was clearly injured, one of its legs hanging useless at its side. Yet it continued to fight, driven by programming that prioritized the mission above self-preservation. Grim, however, adapted its approach. Rather than attacking the injured opponent directly, it maneuvered to keep both units in view, using controlled strikes to wear them down, rather than seeking a decisive victory. It was fighting not to kill, but to neutralize, to end the threat with minimal damage to either side. The battle continued for several minutes, a dance of attack and counter that gradually shifted in Grimm's favor. Beta and Gamma began to falter, their coordinated attacks becoming increasingly desperate and predictable. Finally, after a particularly vicious exchange, both units backed away, clearly reassessing the situation. What happened next astonished even Draven. Grimm deliberately turned its back on both opponents and walked to the center of the arena. There it stopped, lowered itself to a resting position, and waited. Beta and Gamma hesitated, their programming struggling to interpret this unexpected behavior. After a moment of confusion, they attempted another coordinated attack, rushing from opposite directions. At the last possible instant, Grimm rose and pivoted, presenting its armored flank to Beta, while lashing out at Gamma with pinpoint precision. The strike caught Gamma at the base of its neck, targeting the neural control center that governed its combat functions. Gamma immediately went limp, its systems temporarily disabled but not destroyed. Beta pulled up short, suddenly alone against an opponent that had just neutralized its partner with a single blow. For a tense moment, Beta and Grimm faced each other across the arena. Then, in a display of either intelligence or self-preservation that defied its programming, Beta backed away, lowered its head in submission, and went still. The arena fell silent. On the observation platform, the technicians were furiously analyzing the data from their monitoring equipment. Neural activity suggests high-level strategic processing, one reported. It wasn't just reacting. It was planning multiple moves ahead. And it deliberately chose non-lethal tactics, another added. There were at least 7 opportunities for killing blows that it didn't take. Colonel Rowan's expression had hardened into a mask of controlled frustration. It's still following its base programming, he insisted. Combat efficiency, nothing more. That doesn't explain the restraint, Draven countered. Or the tactics. Grimm isn't fighting to destroy. He's fighting to survive. There's a difference. Rowan's jaw tightened. Final phase, he ordered. Activate the command override. The technician at the control panel hesitated. Sir, the agreement was 3 combat tests. We've completed those. The agreement was to test its capabilities, Rowan snapped. I'm not satisfied. Activate the override. Before Draven could protest, the technician input the command. Down in the arena, the neural collar around Grimm's neck activated, lights blinking as it transmitted the override signal directly to the embedded augments. Grimm stiffened, head raised as the foreign commands flooded its neural pathways. A visible tremor ran through its powerful frame. What are you doing? Draven demanded, turning on Rowan. This wasn't part of the deal. I'm demonstrating that despite your claims of evolution and free will, it remains what it was built to be. A weapon that can be controlled. Rowan nodded to the technician. Combat Protocol Alpha 6. The technician relayed the command through the collar's interface. Alpha 6 was a kill order, designed to override all other functions and trigger unstoppable aggression. In the arena, Grimm's trembling increased. Its head lowered, the neural ports glowing with increased activity. A harsh mechanical sound emanated from its throat, the precursor to a battle cry. Draven watched in horror, certain he was about to witness the undoing of months of healing and growth. If Grimm reverted to its programmed killing state, Rowan would have all the evidence he needed to reclaim it. But something unexpected happened. Grimm raised its head again, and with deliberate, controlled movements, brought one foot up to the collar around its neck. The trembling had stopped, the harsh sound cut off. With precise application of pressure, Grimm crushed the control mechanism between its claws. The lights on the collar died, the connection severed. Impossible, one of the technicians breathed. It shouldn't be able to resist a direct neural override. And yet it did, Draven said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. Because Grimm isn't what you made anymore. He's what he chose to become. Rowan's face had gone pale with controlled fury. This proves nothing except that the unit is defective. Its neural architecture has degraded to the point where it can no longer receive commands. That makes it dangerous, unpredictable, a liability that must be contained. No, Draven said firmly. It proves that Grimm has evolved beyond your control. Exactly what I claimed. He faced your challenges, demonstrated tactical thinking, showed restraint, and resisted programming that was literally hardwired into his brain. He stepped closer to Rowan, lowering his voice. You gave your word, Colonel. A demonstration was all you wanted. Well, you got it. Now honor our agreement. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Former commander and soldier, now adversaries across an ideological divide. Finally, Rowan turned away. The test is concluded, he announced. Return the subject to holding for evaluation. That wasn't our deal, Driven protested. I don't make deals with equipment, Rowan replied coldly. He gestured to the security personnel. Escort Mr. Rule to the visitor quarters. We'll continue this discussion once I've reviewed the data. Driven found himself being firmly guided toward the exit. He looked down at the arena one last time, meeting Grimm's gaze across the distance. The creature stood tall, undefeated, watching as handlers approached cautiously from all sides. This isn't over, Draven called to Rowan. You know what you saw. The colonel didn't respond, already deep in conversation with his technical staff, but as the door closed behind Draven, he couldn't shake the feeling that Rowan was more shaken by the demonstration than he wanted to admit. The visitor quarters were little more than a detention cell, though officially Draven wasn't under arrest. He paced the small space for hours, alternating between worry for Grimm and anger at Rowan's betrayal. The colonel had never intended to honor their agreement. The demonstration had been a pretext to reclaim what he considered military property. As evening approached, the door to Driven's quarters opened to admit a young officer carrying a data tablet. The colonel requests your presence at the main observation deck in 1 hour, the officer announced formally. Appropriate attire will be provided. Where's Grimm? Driven demanded. What have they done with him? The officer's expression revealed nothing. I'm not authorized to discuss that information. Please be ready in 1 hour. He placed a package on the small table. These are for you. After the officer left, Draven examined the package. Inside was a formal Colonial Defense Force uniform. Not his old combat gear, but the dress uniform of a retired veteran, complete with service medals and rank insignia. The symbolism wasn't subtle. Rowan was reminding him of his place in the hierarchy, of the oaths he had once sworn. For a moment, Draven considered refusing the summons, refusing the uniform. But that would accomplish nothing. If he wanted any chance of helping Grimm, he needed to play along, at least for now. An hour later, dressed in the uncomfortable formality of a uniform he'd hoped never to wear again, Draven was escorted to the main observation deck. Unlike the utilitarian platforms around the training arena, this was an impressive space designed to showcase the facility to visiting dignitaries. A wall of windows, overlooking the entire complex, with the training arena prominently visible at the center. Colonel Rowan stood at the panoramic windows, hands clasped behind his back, watching activity in the arena below. He turned as Driven entered, eyes taking in the uniform with a nod of approval. It suits you still, Rowan observed. Once a soldier, always a soldier. I left that life behind, Driven replied, moving to stand beside the colonel at the window. Down below, he could see technicians preparing the arena for some kind of event. Large lights had been set up, and seating was being arranged around the perimeter. What's happening down there? A demonstration, Rowan said, echoing Draven's earlier words with ironic precision. The regional governor and several colonial investors will be attending. We're showcasing the latest advancements in military technology. A cold feeling settled in Draven's stomach, including Grimm. Object 42M represents a significant breakthrough, a combat unit capable of autonomous decision-making and tactical adaptation. The applications are considerable. Rowan turned to face Draven directly. I'm offering you a position, Draven, special consultant to the bioengineering division. Your insights into how you rehabilitated the unit would be valuable. Draven stared at the colonel, disbelief giving way to understanding. You're not taking Grimm for dissection. You want to replicate what happened. The next generation of combat mounts could be revolutionary. Units that think, adapt, and make battlefield decisions without constant oversight. The strategic advantage would be immeasurable. Rowan's eyes gleamed with ambition. And you could be at the forefront of that development. By helping you turn more living creatures into weapons, Draven said flatly. By undoing everything Grimm and I have worked for. Rowan's expression hardened. Don't be naive. What you see as some kind of redemption story, I see as untapped military potential. That creature was designed for warfare. The fact that it's evolved beyond its programming doesn't change its purpose. It enhances it. You're wrong, Draven said quietly. Grimm evolved because he found something worth fighting for besides destruction. He learned to protect rather than destroy, to think beyond the mission. That's not something you can program or replicate in a lab. A poetic interpretation, Rowan dismissed. But the neural data tells a different story. Your Grim has simply repurposed its combat protocols toward new objectives. It's still a weapon, just one that's chosen its own targets. Driven turned back to the window, watching the preparations below. Where is he now? Secure holding, undergoing final evaluation before tomorrow's demonstration. Rowan placed a hand on Draven's shoulder. Be practical, Sergeant. The unit is going to serve the Defense Force one way or another, either as a prototype for the next generation or as a research material. At least my offer gives you both a future. Draven shrugged off the hand. And if I refuse? Then you'll be escorted off base immediately, with gratitude for your service and a generous settlement for your investment. Rowan's voice chilled. But Object 42M remains here, regardless of your decision. For a long moment, Driven was silent, weighing options that all seemed to lead to the same outcome. Separation from Grim, a return to the isolation he'd experienced before their unlikely partnership. I want to see him, he said finally. Before I decide. Rowan hesitated, then nodded. A reasonable request. I'll have you escorted to the holding facility. But understand this, Driven. My offer expires at dawn. After that, events will proceed according to military necessity. The holding facility was located beneath the main complex, a sterile environment of reinforced cells designed to contain various military assets. Driven was led through security checkpoints with increasing levels of restriction, finally arriving at a large observation room with a transparent wall separating it from an adjacent chamber. Grim was visible through the barrier, confined within a heavy restraint frame that limited its movement to a few steps in any direction. Monitoring devices were attached to various points on its body, with particular concentration around the neural ports. Despite these indignities, Grim stood tall, head raised, watching the technicians who moved around the chamber with cautious respect. When Driven entered the observation room, Grim's head turned immediately, its golden eye finding him with unerring precision. A visible change came over the creature, a subtle relaxation, a softening of its stance. You have 5 minutes, the security officer informed Driven. The barrier is soundproof, but the subject can see you. His name is Grim, Draven said automatically, moving to stand directly before the transparent wall. He placed one hand against the barrier, a gesture he and Grim had often shared during their early days of building trust. Without hesitation, Grim moved as far forward as the restraints would allow, stretching to place its head near Draven's hand. Though they couldn't touch, the intent was clear. Connection across the divide. I'm going to get you out of here, Draven said, knowing Grim couldn't hear, but needing to say the words anyway. I don't know how yet, but I will. They have no right to keep you. Grim's eye never left Draven's face, as if reading the words from his expression. A low hum emanated from the neural augments. Not the harsh mechanical sound of combat preparation, but the softer tone that Draven had come to associate with deep thought or emotional response. Time's up, the security officer announced after what seemed like mere seconds. Draven ignored him, maintaining the connection with Grim. Trust me, he said. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever they try to make you do, remember who you are now. Not what they built, but what you chose to become. Grim blinked once, slowly, their private signal of understanding. Then it deliberately backed away from the barrier, resuming its dignified stance at the center of the restraint frame. Sir, we need to go, the officer insisted, more firmly this time. Draven allowed himself to be led away, his mind racing. Rowan's offer was clearly a trap, a way to exploit both Grim's unique development and Draven's knowledge without any real intention of treating either with respect. But refusing meant immediate separation and likely worse outcomes for Grim. As he was escorted back to his quarters, a plan began to form in Draven's mind. It was desperate, potentially suicidal, and depended on factors beyond his control. But it was the only chance they had. Dawn broke clear and cold over the military complex. The demonstration was scheduled for mid-morning, giving Draven precious little time to implement his hastily conceived plan. He had spent most of the night working out the details, calculating risks, and preparing for various contingencies. When the escort arrived to bring him to Rowan for his final decision, Draven was ready, dressed once again in the formal uniform, expression carefully neutral. The colonel was waiting in his office, reviewing reports on a data screen. He looked up as Draven entered, dismissing the escort with a nod. Your decision? Rowan asked without preamble. I need guarantees, Draven replied. If I accept the consultant position, Grimm remains under my direct supervision. No experimentation without my approval, no neural tampering, no combat situations unless I deem him ready. Rowan leaned back, studying Draven with newfound respect. You're in no position to make demands. I'm in exactly the position to make demands, Draven countered. You need me to understand how Grimm evolved. Without my cooperation, your research will take months or years longer, if it succeeds at all. A thin smile crossed Rowan's face. You've become quite the negotiator, Sergeant. He tapped his fingers on the desk, considering. Very well. Provisional approval, pending review after 90 days. The unit remains military property, but you'll have supervisory authority over its handling and training. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough, but it would have to do. Draven needed to be present for the demonstration, needed access to Grimm before everything else fell into place. Agreed, he said, extending his hand. On one additional condition, I want to prepare Grimm personally before the demonstration. No technicians, no observers. Just 5 minutes to ensure he understands what's expected. Rowan's eyes narrowed slightly. Why? Because he trusts me, Draven said simply. And if you want him to perform as impressively as he did yesterday, you need him calm and focused, not agitated by strangers poking at his neural ports. After a moment of consideration, Rowan nodded. 5 minutes under observation from the security cameras. No physical contact with the restraint systems or monitoring equipment. Agreed. They shook hands, sealing a bargain that Draven had no intention of honoring beyond the next few hours. What Rowan didn't know, couldn't know, was that Draven had already set other events in motion during the night, using the limited communications access he'd been granted as a guest rather than a prisoner. 30 minutes later, Draven stood in the holding chamber with Grimm, the heavy door sealed behind him. Security cameras tracked their every movement, but for the moment, they had the privacy of direct communication. Listen carefully, Draven said quietly, positioning himself to block the camera's view of Grimm's face. In 1 hour, they're going to put you in the arena again, this time for a show, to demonstrate your capabilities to people who see you as nothing but a weapon. Grimm watched him intently, the neural augments humming with activity. When they lead you out, I'll be on the observation platform with Rowan and the other officials. At exactly 10:45 hours, there's going to be a security alert, a perimeter breach on the east fence. It's not real, but it will draw attention and resources. Draven moved closer, keeping his voice just above a whisper. That's our window. When the alert sounds, head for the south exit of the arena. The door control will be temporarily disabled. I'll meet you there. Grimm blinked once, understanding. If this works, we'll have maybe 5 minutes to reach the landing pad before they realize what's happening. There's a transport scheduled for maintenance departure at 10:50. We need to be on it. Draven took a deep breath. It's not much of a plan, and everything has to go perfectly, but it's the best chance we have. The creature made a soft nickering sound. Not agreement or disagreement, but acknowledgement of the stakes. If we get separated, or if something goes wrong, head for the hills north of the homestead. Our backup spot. Wait for me there. Draven placed a hand on Grimm's neck, a gesture that could pass as casual affection to the watching cameras. Whatever happens, remember, you're not theirs anymore. You make your own choices now. The door behind them hissed open, signaling the end of their allotted time. Draven stepped back, his expression returning to professional neutrality for the benefit of the security team waiting to escort him out. See you soon, he said, loud enough for the guards to hear, then turned and left without looking back. He didn't need to. He knew Grimm would be watching, calculating, preparing for whatever came next. The demonstration arena was packed with spectators, military officers, government officials, and corporate investors interested in defense contracts. They sat in tiered seating around the perimeter, protected from the arena floor by transparent barriers. At the center of the VIP section, a raised platform held Colonel Rowan, the regional governor, and several high-ranking military officials. Draven had been positioned at Rowan's side, presented to the visitors as a special consultant whose expertise had helped develop the technology about to be demonstrated. The irony wasn't lost on him, but he played the part convincingly, shaking hands and answering general questions while carefully avoiding specifics. His eyes frequently checked the time, 10:30 hours, 15 minutes until the arranged distraction. His heart pounded, but years of combat experience helped him maintain an outward calm. At precisely 10:35, the demonstration began. The arena lights dimmed except for a central spotlight, and Rowan stepped forward to address the assembled guests. Distinguished visitors, honored colleagues, what you are about to witness represents the future of colonial defense technology, Rowan announced, his voice carrying easily through the amplification system. A breakthrough in autonomous combat systems that combines the strength and durability of engineered organisms with unprecedented adaptive intelligence. The heavy doors at the end of the arena rolled open, and Grim was led out by two handlers using remote control units linked to a temporary restraint collar. The creature moved with dignity, despite the indignity of its situation, head high, steps measured and precise. Specimen 42M has demonstrated the ability to analyze combat situations, develop tactical responses, and execute complex maneuvers without direct command input, Rowan continued. Today we will demonstrate these capabilities against a series of obstacles and simulated threats. The handlers released the remote controls and retreated, leaving Grim alone in the center of the arena. A series of mechanical obstacles began to emerge from the floor. Barriers, moving platforms, and target drones designed to test agility and response time. The specimen will now navigate the course without guidance, Rowan explained. Observe the decision-making process, the evaluation of multiple variables, the prioritization of targets. Grim stood motionless for a moment, surveying the course. Then with deliberate calm, it began to move, not rushing headlong into the challenge, but proceeding methodically, analyzing each obstacle before engaging. The audience watched in rapt attention as Grim navigated the increasingly complex course. It moved with fluid grace, anticipating the movements of mechanical elements, calculating optimal paths, demonstrating physical capabilities that seemed impossible for a creature of its size. Draven split his attention between the display and the time. 10:42. 3 minutes remaining. He glanced around the arena, noting the positions of security personnel, the locations of exits. Everything was proceeding according to Rowan's plan, which meant the colonel's guard was down, his focus on impressing the visitors rather than security protocols. At 10:44, the demonstration shifted to a combat simulation. Remote-controlled drones entered the arena, armed with training weapons that delivered mild electrical shocks rather than actual damage. They converged on Grim from multiple directions, forcing it to defend itself while continuing to navigate the obstacle course. Draven tensed, hands gripping the railing of the observation platform. 30 seconds. The drones attacked in coordinated patterns, their movements programmed to test Grim's combat responses. But instead of reacting with aggression, Grim employed the same tactical approach it had demonstrated the day before, minimizing conflict, using the environment to its advantage, neutralizing threats with precise, controlled movements rather than raw power. Note the restraint, Rowan was saying. The unit calculates optimal force application, preserving energy and minimizing unnecessary damage. This represents a significant advance over previous generations, which tended toward maximum aggression regardless of tactical situation. At exactly 10:45, alarms began to sound throughout the facility. Red warning lights flashed, and the security communication system crackled to life. Alert! Perimeter breach! East sector! All security personnel to response positions. This is not a drill. The reaction was immediate. Guards stationed around the arena began moving toward predetermined response positions. The audience murmured in concern, some rising from their seats. Rowan grabbed a communication device from an aide. Report! What's happening? While the colonel was distracted, Draven moved. He slipped away from the VIP platform, using the confusion to make his way toward the service corridor that led to the arena's south exit. Behind him, he could hear Rowan ordering the demonstration suspended and security protocols engaged. In the arena, Grim had already responded to the alarm. As planned, it moved purposefully toward the south exit, ignoring the drones that continued to circle in their program patterns, now without purpose or direction. Draven reached the service corridor just as the first security overrides began to engage. Lights shifting to emergency mode, doors beginning automatic lockdown sequences. He had less time than anticipated. The false alarm had been detected more quickly than he'd hoped. At the control panel for the arena's south exit, Draven input the access code he'd memorized from observation during their arrival. The panel flashed red, denied. They had already changed the codes. Panic threatened to overtake him, but years of combat training kicked in. When the primary plan fails, adapt. He looked around desperately for an alternative. The ventilation access panel. Every arena had one, a maintenance access point for the environmental systems. It wouldn't be large enough for a human, but for Grimm, with its flexible, multi-jointed physiology, Draven ripped open the panel, revealing a dark shaft large enough for Grimm to navigate if it compressed itself. Through the small window in the exit door, he could see Grimm approaching, security personnel now entering the arena from the opposite side. He pounded on the door to get Grimm's attention, then pointed frantically at the open ventilation shaft. Grimm understood immediately, changing course to intercept. "Stop! Security override Alpha 9!" one of the guards shouted, activating a control device similar to the one used by the handlers. Grimm faltered momentarily as the command registered in its neural augments. But then, just as it had done during the test, it pushed through the programming, reasserting its own control. It reached the ventilation shaft and began squeezing its large frame into the confined space, moving with surprising speed and agility. Draven replaced the access panel just as security personnel reached the exit door. He adopted an authoritative posture, turning to face them as they burst through. "The subject is attempting to exit through the north corridor," he reported, using the tone of a concerned officer. "Colonel Rowan ordered me to secure this exit." The security team hesitated, torn between the apparent authority in his voice and their standing orders. That momentary confusion was all Draven needed. He struck quickly, disabling both guards with precision strikes to vulnerable points. Non-lethal, but effective. As the guards collapsed, Draven grabbed their weapons and communication devices. He needed to move quickly now. The entire facility would be looking for both him and Grimm within minutes. Following a mental map of the complex he'd constructed during their arrival, Draven made his way through service corridors toward the maintenance hangar, where transports were prepped for departure. Along the way, he encountered two more security personnel, whom he avoided by ducking into storage rooms until they passed. At the hangar entrance, he paused to check the time. 10:53. The scheduled departure had likely been delayed by the security alert, but for how long remained uncertain. He peered through the small window in the door, assessing the situation inside. The hangar was busy with activity, but focused on the alert rather than normal operations. Maintenance crews had paused their work, gathering near communication stations for updates. Several transports sat on the floor, including one positioned near the exit doors, its engines showing pre-flight warming indicators. Draven needed to locate Grimm before making his next move. The ventilation system from the arena would exit somewhere in this general area, but pinpointing the exact location was impossible without facility schematics. As he scanned the hangar, movement caught his eye. A ventilation grate high on the wall behind a stack of supply crates was shifting slightly. Grimm had navigated the system successfully. Draven entered the hangar, keeping his posture confident and purposeful. Dressed in the formal uniform, he didn't immediately trigger suspicion as he moved toward the supply area. When he reached the crates, he glanced up to see Grimm's golden eye watching him through the grate. "Almost there," Draven murmured. "Wait for my signal." He continued past the crates, approaching the transport nearest the exit. It was a standard military shuttle, designed for personnel transport rather than cargo. Faster than their original target, but with less room for Grimm's bulk. It would have to do. The pre-flight sequence had been initiated, but the pilot wasn't present, likely responding to the security alert. Draven slipped into the cockpit, quickly assessing the controls. Standard configuration, similar to vehicles he'd operated during his service. He could fly it. Returning to the main hangar, Draven moved to a control panel near the supply area. With a quick prayer that his access hadn't yet been revoked, he input his consultant code into the system. The panel flashed green, accepted. Quickly, he executed a sequence of commands, triggering a diagnostic alarm in the hangar's far section. As personnel moved to investigate, he returned to the ventilation grate and signaled Grimm. The creature needed no further instruction. With controlled force, it pushed through the grate and dropped to the floor behind the crates, immediately crouching low to minimize visibility. "Transport, 50 yards, straight ahead," Draven said quietly. "Move on my mark, directly to the rear hatch. Don't stop for anything." Grimm blinked once. Ready. Draven checked the hangar again. Most attention was focused on the diagnostic alarm, creating a temporary blind spot near their targeted transport. It was now or never. Mark! They moved simultaneously, Driven walking briskly toward the transport, as if on official business. Grim keeping low and using the crates and equipment as cover, staying in Draven's shadow as much as possible. The distance seemed to stretch endlessly, each step an eternity of vulnerability. They had covered half the distance when a shout went up from across the hangar. Security alert! All personnel, be advised, escape test subject, an unauthorized officer in vicinity of maintenance hangar, considered armed and dangerous. Their time had run out. Driven abandoned stealth for speed. Run, he shouted to Grim. Get to the transport. They sprinted the remaining distance as security personnel began pouring into the hangar from multiple entrances. Weapons fire erupted, stun charges designed to incapacitate rather than kill, but dangerous nonetheless. Driven reached the transport first, slapping the emergency override to open the rear hatch. It began to lower agonizingly slowly. Behind him, Grim was charging across the open floor, drawing most of the fire as security teams focused on the larger, more obvious target. Come on, Draven muttered, willing the hatch to move faster. As soon as there was enough space, he ducked inside, racing to the cockpit to initiate launch procedures. Behind him, he heard the distinctive sound of Grim leaping into the transport, followed by the hiss of the hatch closing. Through the viewports, Driven could see security teams forming a perimeter around the transport, weapons raised. Several officers were shouting into communication devices, likely requesting authorization to use lethal force. The engines roared to life as Driven bypassed several safety protocols to accelerate the launch sequence. Warning lights flashed across the control panel, but he ignored them, focusing solely on getting the transport moving before they were completely surrounded. Hold on, he called to Grim, who had wedged itself into the passenger compartment, secured as best as possible given the space constraints. Driven engaged the thrusters at maximum power, a reckless maneuver that sent the transport lurching forward toward the hangar doors. Security personnel scattered from its path, diving for cover as the massive vehicle bore down on them. The hangar doors began to close, an automatic security response to the unauthorized launch. They were moving too slowly. The transport would be trapped if Driven didn't act quickly. He diverted power from life support to engines, pushing the transport beyond safe operational parameters. The craft shuddered under the strain, but accelerated sharply, hurtling toward the narrowing gap between the massive doors. Brace for impact, Driven shouted, angling the transport slightly to minimize its profile. They hit the partially closed doors with a sickening crunch of metal against metal, the transport shearing off external components as it forced its way through the gap. Warning alarms blared throughout the cockpit, damage reports flooding the status displays. But they were through, out of the hangar and into the open air above the facility. Driven didn't waste time assessing the damage. He pushed the transport into a steep climb, trying to gain altitude and distance before pursuit could be organized. It wasn't long in coming. Within minutes, radar showed 2 military interceptors launching from the facility's main airfield. Faster and better armed than their damaged transport, the interceptors would overtake them within minutes. We need somewhere to set down, Draven called back to Grim. Somewhere they can't follow with aircraft. Grim moved forward, crowding into the cockpit space to look at the navigation display. With careful precision, it extended one clawed foot to tap a specific point on the map, a region of canyons and caves in the mountains north of their homestead. The area was notorious for electromagnetic interference that disrupted navigation systems and communications. Perfect, Driven said, adjusting their course. If we can reach the canyons, we might lose them in the interference, but we need to buy time. He pushed the damaged transport into a series of evasive maneuvers, descending to skim just above the treetops of the forest that stretched between the military facility and the mountains. The lower altitude would make them harder to track, but also increase the danger of collision with the terrain. The interceptors adjusted their approach, spreading out to flank the fleeing transport. A warning tone sounded in the cockpit. Weapon lock. They were preparing to fire. This is going to get rough, Driven warned, gripping the controls tightly. I'm going to take us into that ravine ahead. It's too narrow for them to follow. The ravine appeared before them, a jagged cut in the landscape, barely wide enough for the transport. Driven banked sharply, dropping the nose to align with the narrow passage. Behind them, the interceptors fired, not to destroy but to disable. Energy pulses streaked past the transport, one grazing the left stabilizer. The impact sent them into a dangerous roll. Driven fought the controls, using every bit of skill from his years as a combat pilot to keep the craft from smashing into the ravine walls. They scraped against stone, losing more external components, but somehow maintained forward momentum. The interceptors pulled up, unable to follow into the confined space. But they wouldn't give up. They would track the ravine, waiting for the transport to emerge or crash. Deeper into the ravine they flew, the walls closing in even tighter. Warning systems screamed as structural integrity reached critical levels. They couldn't continue much longer without risking complete failure. "We need to set down," Driven said grimly. "The transport won't make it to the mountains?" Grim made a sound of agreement, then gestured with its head toward a small opening in the ravine wall, a cave or tunnel large enough for them, but not for the craft. Draven understood immediately. He brought the transport to a hovering stop adjacent to the opening, the engines straining with the effort. "Go!" he urged Grim. "I'll set the transport on autopilot to continue down the ravine. It should buy us some time before they realize we're not aboard." Grim hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave Draven behind. "I'm right behind you," Draven promised. "Go!" With a final look that communicated both trust and concern, Grim forced its way through the side hatch, leaping the short distance to the cave opening. It landed securely, then turned back to watch for Driven. Working quickly, Driven programmed a simple autopilot sequence. Continue down the ravine for 5 minutes, then attempt to climb out. It would likely end in a crash, but by then, they would be well away from the transport. He gathered the emergency supplies from the storage compartment, slung the pack over his shoulder, and moved to the hatch. The gap between the hovering transport and the cave looked much larger from this perspective. Driven took a deep breath, backed up for momentum, and leaped across the void. His boots slipped on the edge of the rock, balance failing as gravity pulled him backward toward the ravine floor hundreds of feet below. In that moment of certain death, a powerful grip caught his arm. Grim had lunged forward, clamping its jaws gently but firmly around Driven's forearm, arresting his fall. With careful strength, it pulled him to safety, backing into the cave until they were both securely on solid ground. Driven leaned against the cave wall, heart pounding, adrenaline surging through his system. "Thank you," he gasped. Grim made a soft, nickering sound. "You're welcome," then nudged Driven gently, urging him deeper into the cave. They needed to move quickly before the interceptors realized their prey had escaped. As they retreated into the darkness, the transport continued its programmed flight down the ravine, drawing pursuit away from their actual position. By the time the military figured out the deception, Driven and Grim would be miles away, hidden in terrain too difficult for conventional pursuit. The cave system proved extensive, a natural labyrinth of tunnels and chambers that wound through the mountain's interior. Driven used a small emergency light to guide their way, conserving its power as much as possible. Grim moved confidently even in near darkness, its enhanced senses providing guidance where human perception failed. They traveled for hours, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the pursuit they knew would come. The tunnel system gradually ascended, eventually opening onto a small plateau high in the mountains, overlooking the vast wilderness that stretched toward the horizon. Night had fallen by the time they emerged, the twin moons of Keras 9 casting an ethereal light across the landscape. In the far distance, they could see lights moving, search parties combing the foothills, still seeking the fugitives who had embarrassed Colonial Defense Force security. "They'll keep looking," Draven said, studying the pattern of searchlights. "Rowan won't give up easily. His pride won't allow it." Grim made a soft sound of agreement, settling beside Draven at the edge of the plateau. They sat in companionable silence for a time, both processing the events of the day and contemplating the uncertain future ahead. "We can't go back to the homestead," Draven said eventually. "That's the first place they'll monitor. We need to keep moving, find somewhere beyond colonial territory." He sighed, feeling the weight of starting over yet again. "I'm sorry about this. You finally had a home, some peace, and now—" Grim interrupted with a gentle nudge, its meaning clear. The homestead had never been home, not the buildings or the land, but the partnership they had formed. Home was wherever they were together. Draven smiled, understanding without words. "You're right. We'll find another place, somewhere they won't think to look." He studied the wilderness spread before them. The uncharted territories to the north are largely unexplored, difficult terrain, unpredictable weather, but that makes it perfect for hiding, We can build something new there. As they rested and planned, other escaped military mounts began to find them. Creatures like Grim, who had broken free during the confusion of the security breach. Some bore injuries from their escape. Others showed signs of long-term mistreatment similar to what Grim had endured. They approached cautiously, drawn by some unspoken recognition of kinship. Grim welcomed them, communicating in ways Driven couldn't fully comprehend, but could certainly observe. A new community was forming, not based on human command structures or military hierarchies, but on mutual understanding and shared experience. By dawn, their small group had grown to 7. Grim, Driven, and 5 other battle mounts of varying designs and capabilities. All had chosen freedom over servitude. All had demonstrated the same evolution beyond their programming that Grim had pioneered. As the first light of the new day crested the horizon, Driven stood and surveyed their unlikely band of fugitives. Each creature was unique in design and capability, yet they shared a common journey. From weapons to individuals, from programmed obedience to conscious choice. "We move north," he announced, pointing toward the distant mountains that marked the boundary of charted territory. "The journey won't be easy, but we'll travel together. Watch out for each other." He turned to Grim. "Lead the way. You understand them better than I ever could." Grim rose to its full height, its golden eye scanning the horizon. With a soft nickering sound that the others immediately responded to, it moved to the edge of the plateau and found a path leading downward. Not the most direct route, but the most secure, avoiding areas where pursuit would be likely. The group moved with coordinated efficiency, the stronger members helping those with injuries, scouts ranging ahead to check for danger. Draven watched with amazement as complex social behaviors emerged spontaneously among creatures designed for isolation and combat. They weren't just escaping, they were forming a community. For 3 days, they traveled through increasingly wild terrain, leaving the last vestiges of colonial settlement behind. The landscape grew harsher, jagged mountains, dense forests untouched by development, rivers that cut through stone like liquid silver. It was beautiful in its raw hostility, demanding respect rather than submission. On the 4th day, as they crested a high ridge, a vast valley opened before them, sheltered by mountains on all sides, rich with vegetation fed by a network of streams that converged into a central lake. Natural caves dotted the valley walls, offering shelter from the elements. The remoteness of the location, combined with the electromagnetic interference from mineral deposits in the surrounding mountains, made it virtually invisible to colonial scanners. "This is it," Draven said, a sense of rightness settling in his chest. "This is where we start over." Grim surveyed the valley with that calculating intelligence that had so impressed Draven from the beginning. It made a soft sound of agreement, then led the way down the steep path toward their new home. The first weeks were focused on survival, establishing shelter, finding food sources, securing the perimeter against native predators. The battle mounts, designed for harsh conditions, adapted quickly to their new environment. Their military enhancements, intended for destruction, now served life and community. Driven found his role shifting from leader to partner, from rescuer to participant. He contributed his human knowledge and skills, but increasingly deferred to the creature's natural abilities and emerging social structures. Grim remained his closest companion, but operated more independently now, mediating between Draven and the others, teaching by example rather than command. As summer gave way to autumn, their settlement took shape. The caves were expanded into interconnected living spaces, with Driven's smaller quarters adjoining the larger chambers where the mounts preferred to rest together. Hunting territories were established, water sources protected, watch rotations maintained, not through hierarchy, but through mutual agreement and natural aptitude. Word of their sanctuary began to spread, carried through channels Draven couldn't track or understand. More escaped military assets found their way to the valley, not just battle mounts, but other engineered creatures designed for various combat and support roles. Each arrival was evaluated by Grim and the original group, accepted if they demonstrated the same evolution beyond programming, guided elsewhere if they still carried the instincts of weapons rather than beings. One evening, as Driven sat by the fire he'd built near the cave entrance, Grim approached with unusual purpose. The creature had been absent for most of the day, not uncommon as it often ranged far to scout the surrounding territory. But something in its bearing suggested more than a routine patrol. What is it? Driven asked, recognizing the signs of important news. Grimm made a series of gestures with its head and front limbs, a communication system they had developed over months of partnership. Driven had learned to read these signals with increasing accuracy, though some nuances still escaped him. Visitors, he translated, rising to his feet in alarm. Colonial forces? Grimm shook its head, then made another series of gestures, more complex, conveying concepts rather than simple information. Understanding dawned gradually. Human visitors, not military. Settlers? A nod of confirmation. How many? Where? More gestures indicating a small group, perhaps 5 or 6 individuals, who had established a temporary camp in a valley several miles to the east. They appeared to be scientific researchers or explorers rather than military personnel or official colonists. Driven considered this development carefully. Their sanctuary had remained hidden for nearly 6 months, the military search having shifted to other sectors after finding no trace of the fugitives. But humans in proximity, even non-military ones, represented a potential threat. We should observe them, he decided, determine their purpose before making contact or driving them away. Grimm agreed with a soft, nickering sound. It had already positioned 2 of the more stealthy mounts as watchers near the human camp, with instructions to report but not engage. The next morning, Driven and Grimm set out to conduct their own observation. They traveled swiftly through familiar territory, Grimm's 6 legs navigating the difficult terrain with ease, Driven riding comfortably on its back, a position that had long since ceased to feel strange to either of them. They approached the researchers' camp from downwind, concealing themselves among the dense vegetation of a hillside overlooking the site. Through binoculars, Driven studied the group. 3 men and 2 women, dressed for scientific fieldwork rather than military operation. Their equipment was predominantly research-oriented. Sample collection tools, portable analyzers, data recording devices. No weapons were visible beyond standard-issue survival gear. Scientists, Driven murmured, probably cataloging native species or geological formations, independent researchers, not colonial survey teams. Grimm watched with equal intensity, its enhanced senses gathering information beyond human perception. After several minutes, it nudged Driven gently, indicating it had seen enough. They retreated to a safe distance before discussing their observations. They're no immediate threat, Driven concluded, but their presence means this region won't remain uncharted for long. Others will follow. More researchers, then prospectors, eventually colonists. Grimm made a series of gestures indicating agreement, then added additional signals suggesting a more active response. Driven frowned, interpreting. You want to make contact? That's risky. The creature elaborated its thinking through more complex communication. The essence was clear. Isolation was temporary at best. Eventually, they would have to determine how to coexist with humans who were not enemies. Better to establish terms from a position of strength than wait until they were discovered accidentally. You're thinking long-term, Driven acknowledged, but if word gets back to Rowan or Colonial Defense. Grimm's response was immediate and emphatic, a reminder that they had created a community capable of defending itself if necessary, but also one with the wisdom to recognize potential allies. These researchers might be more inclined to understand than to fear, to document rather than capture. Driven considered the argument, finding the logic sound, if optimistic. We approach carefully, he decided. I'll make initial contact alone. You and the others remain hidden but ready. If there's any sign of threat, we withdraw immediately. The plan was set in motion the following day. Driven approached the research camp openly, hands visible, dressed in simple wilderness gear that gave no indication of his military background. He had removed all colonial identification and insignia, presenting himself as an independent settler rather than a fugitive. The researchers were understandably startled by his appearance, immediately gathering together in defensive positions. The older man, clearly the expedition leader, stepped forward cautiously. "Hello there," he called. "You're a long way from any settlement." "As are you," Driven replied, stopping at a non-threatening distance. "My name is Driven. I live in the region." "Dr. Marcus Elliott," the man introduced himself. "Independent Biological Survey Team from University Station. We didn't realize anyone had settled this far into the uncharted zone." "It's just the kind of information you're here to discover, isn't it?" Driven said with a slight smile. "What lives where it isn't supposed to?" Elliot relaxed slightly, professional interest overcoming caution. That's one way to put it. We're documenting adaptive evolution in isolated ecosystems. 3-month expedition, he gestured to his team. Are there more of you? A settlement? A small community, Driven answered, deliberately vague. We value our privacy, which is why I came to introduce myself. These valleys may seem empty, but they're home to many species you won't find in your databases. Some might be dangerous if approached incorrectly. One of the female researchers, younger with an intensity that reminded Draven of intelligence officers, stepped forward. Are you referring to native species or introduced ones? Our preliminary scans showed some anomalous readings that don't match the expected evolutionary patterns of this planet. Draven measured his words carefully. Both. Keras-9 has its own mysteries, but it's also become home to refugees, you might say. Beings who need space to determine their own existence? The researchers exchanged glances, clearly intrigued by his cryptic response. Elliot's expression showed the gleam of scientific discovery. Mr. Draven, we have no intention of interfering with any settlement or ecosystem. We're here to observe and document, not to claim or report. He hesitated, then added, but I must admit, you've piqued our professional curiosity. Draven made a decision, one he hoped Grimm would approve. Perhaps we can help each other. Your research would benefit from local knowledge. Our community would benefit from medical supplies and information about colonial movements that might threaten our isolation. A fair exchange, Elliot agreed, though caution remained in his eyes. But I sense there's more you're not telling us. These refugees you mentioned, they're not typical colonists, are they? No, Draven admitted. They're unique. And before I can tell you more, I need your word, scientist to scientist, that what you see stays in your field notes, not in colonial reports. Elliot considered this, then nodded slowly. I've spent my career documenting the unexpected. What authorities don't understand, they often destroy. You have my word. Draven believed him, not out of naivety, but from recognition of a kindred spirit who valued knowledge above regulation. He raised his hand in a signal toward the surrounding forest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with deliberate slowness, Grimm emerged from the tree line, a magnificent sight even to Draven, who saw it daily. The creature moved with predatory grace, its augmented body catching the sunlight on metal and organic components alike, its golden eye fixed on the researchers with undeniable intelligence. The effect was immediate and dramatic. 2 of the researchers stumbled backward in alarm. The young woman who had spoken earlier gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Elliot himself went rigid, recognition dawning on his face. That's a military mount, he breathed. Class 3 combat organism, but it's not. He struggled to reconcile what he was seeing with what he knew of such creatures. His name is Grimm, Draven said, walking to stand beside his friend. And he's not what the military designed him to be. None of them are anymore. Grimm lowered its head in a gesture of greeting, deliberate, dignified, unmistakably communicative. Its neural augments hummed softly, processing the new humans with careful analysis rather than combat protocols. Sentient, the young woman whispered, scientific training overcoming fear. It's fully sentient. They all are, Draven confirmed. That's what the military couldn't accept, that their weapons evolved minds of their own. Over the next hours, as initial shock gave way to cautious fascination, Draven explained their story. Not all details, but enough to convey the essence of their journey from the auction yard to their hidden sanctuary. Grimm remained present throughout, occasionally adding to the narrative through gestures that Draven translated. The researchers listened with increasing amazement, and Draven noted with relief, ethical concern rather than exploitative interest. This challenges everything we thought we knew about neural augmentation and engineered organisms, Elliot said when the story concluded. The military has always insisted the augments create enhanced reflexes and tactical processing, but not true consciousness. They were wrong, Draven said simply, or they lied. Either way, the truth is standing before you. The young researcher who had recognized Grimm's sentience immediately, Dr. Lyra, Draven learned, had been observing the creature with intense focus throughout the conversation. The implications are staggering, she said, not just for military ethics, but for our understanding of consciousness itself. If neural networks designed for combat algorithms can evolve into true sentience, she looked directly at Grimm. You're not just free, you're pioneers. Grimm acknowledged this with a dignified dip of its head. The question becomes, Elliot said more pragmatically, what happens now? Your sanctuary won't remain hidden forever, especially as colonial expansion continues. There are already proposals for a major survey expedition into this region next year. Then we need more than isolation, Draven replied. We need recognition, legal standing, protection. A tall order, Elliot cautioned. The military-industrial complex has significant investment in these assets. They won't relinquish control easily. But if the scientific community documented and verified your findings, Lyra suggested, if we could prove true sentience according to established cognitive measures, it would create an ethical imperative that even colonial administration would struggle to ignore. Draven exchanged a look with Grimm, both recognizing the risk and opportunity in this suggestion. After a moment of silent communication, Grimm nodded its assent. What would this documentation involve? Draven asked. Non-invasive cognitive assessment, Lyra explained. Observation of social behaviors, problem-solving capabilities, communication patterns. Nothing that would harm or control, only record and verify what's already evident to anyone who spends time with them. And this would help establish legal protection? Elliot sighed. It's not guaranteed, but scientific consensus is a powerful thing, especially when it intersects with public opinion. If people knew that military equipment was actually enslaved sentient beings, the implication was clear, a shift from scientific curiosity to moral outrage. We need to discuss this with the others, Draven said. This decision affects all of them, not just Grimm and me. Of course, Elliot agreed. We've already stayed longer than planned for today's survey. Perhaps tomorrow, if you're willing, we could continue this conversation with whatever members of your community wish to participate. The meeting concluded with cautious optimism on both sides. As Draven and Grimm returned to their sanctuary, they debated the potential outcomes of this unexpected development. The risks were significant. Exposure, potential military intervention, the loss of the peace they had fought so hard to establish. But so were the possibilities. Recognition, protection, perhaps eventually a legitimate place in the wider society of the colony. That evening, a council gathered in the largest cave. Draven, Grimm, and representatives from each group of escaped military assets that had joined their community. The discussion was complex, with communication happening on multiple levels simultaneously. Vocalizations, gestures, physical demonstrations with Draven and Grimm translating between groups. Some were immediately opposed to any contact with humans, their memories of captivity and control still too fresh. Others saw opportunity in scientific alliance, a chance to secure their freedom through knowledge rather than isolation. Grimm presented both sides with characteristic thoroughness, neither advocating nor dismissing either position. The choice must be individual, Draven finally concluded. Those who wish to participate in the documentation can do so. Those who prefer to remain hidden will be respected. We didn't fight for freedom only to impose new requirements on each other. This principle of voluntary participation was unanimously accepted. By morning, a decision had been reached. Grimm and 5 others would meet with the scientists, while the rest of the community maintained vigilance from secure positions. The documentation process began cautiously but quickly evolved into a collaborative exploration. Dr. Lyra proved particularly adept at developing nonverbal communication protocols that allowed direct exchange of complex concepts between humans and the various types of augmented beings. Dr. Elliott's expertise in evolutionary biology provided context for understanding how consciousness had emerged from combat programming. Over the following weeks, as trust grew between the two groups, more of the sanctuary's residents chose to participate. The researchers' data accumulated into irrefutable evidence of true sentience. Problem-solving that went far beyond tactical computation, social structures that balanced individual autonomy with community welfare, communication systems that had evolved without human design or direction. What you've created here, Lyra told Draven one evening as they reviewed the day's observations, isn't just a refuge, it's a new society, one that merges the best aspects of human and non-human intelligence. We didn't create it, Draven corrected gently. We discovered it together. Grimm showed me possibilities I couldn't have imagined on my own. As the researchers' expedition neared its conclusion, they prepared comprehensive documentation, anonymized to protect the sanctuary's location, but detailed enough to withstand scientific scrutiny. The findings would be presented at the Intercolonial Scientific Congress, an annual gathering where new discoveries were evaluated by peers from across settled space. This won't be an easy battle, Elliot warned during their final meeting. The military will challenge our findings, question our methods, perhaps even attack our credibility. But the evidence speaks for itself. And once public opinion engages with the ethical implications, we understand the risks, Driven assured him, but hiding forever isn't a solution. Sooner or later, we'd be discovered anyway. Better on our terms than theirs. On the day of the researchers' departure, Grimm accompanied Draven to the Yoichona edge of their territory to bid farewell. Dr. Clark approached them with characteristic directness. "I've been authorized to offer you both passage back to University Station," she said. "Your testimony would strengthen our presentation immeasurably. As the bridge between human and non-human intelligence, you could help others understand what we've witnessed here." Draven glanced at Grimm, whose response was immediate and clear, a negative gesture followed by indications toward the sanctuary. "Our place is here," Draven translated, though the meaning was evident even without words. "The community needs leadership and protection while this process unfolds. But perhaps someday, when the path is safer." Lyra nodded in understanding. "The door remains open, and we'll do everything in our power to ensure your story is heard correctly." The researchers departed with data, recordings, and promises of continued communication through secure channels. Driven and Grimm watched until they disappeared from view, then turned back toward the valley that had become home to so many who had never expected to find one. "Now we wait," Draven said, not without apprehension, "and prepare for whatever comes next." Grimm made a soft sound of agreement, its golden eye reflecting the afternoon sun as it surveyed the territory they had claimed not just for themselves, but for a future neither humans nor military engineers had anticipated. One where freedom was defined not by absence of control, but by presence of choice. The news arrived 6 months later, delivered by a solitary scout drone that entered their territory bearing Dr. Clark's identification codes. The drone carried no weapons, only a secure data package and small supply of medical materials as a gesture of continued alliance. Driven activated the message in the community gathering space, with representatives from all groups present. Dr. Clark's hologram appeared, her expression both triumphant and concerned. "The Scientific Congress has officially recognized non-human sentience in military-augmented organisms," she reported without preamble. "Our findings withstood peer review and challenges from military contractors. The Ethical Committee has issued a preliminary ruling that conscious military assets have protected status and cannot legally be treated as equipment." A wave of reaction passed through the assembled beings, sounds and movements expressing everything from jubilation to skeptical reserve. "However," Clark continued, her tone growing more serious, "implementation of this ruling faces significant obstacles. The Colonial Defense Force has filed appeals, claiming national security exemptions. Corporate interests with investments in military bioengineering are lobbying against regulatory changes. The process could take years to resolve fully." Driven had expected as much. Scientific truth rarely translated immediately to political action, especially when powerful interests were threatened. "There's more," Clark added. "Someone leaked portions of our data. Nothing that reveals your location, but enough to confirm the existence of a sanctuary for escaped military assets. Colonel Rowan has been authorized to form a special recovery team. They're conducting systematic sweeps of the uncharted territories, moving gradually outward from known points of reference." Grimm exchanged a look with Driven, both recognizing the implications. Their sanctuary remained hidden for now, but the search was methodical and persistent. Eventually, even the electromagnetic interference of the surrounding mountains wouldn't be enough to conceal them. "We've bought time and legal ground," Clark concluded, "but not security. Be vigilant. We'll continue fighting through official channels, but you should prepare for the possibility of discovery before the legal battle is won." The hologram flickered. "Stay safe. Stay free. We'll contact you when there are significant developments." The message ended, leaving the community to absorb its mixed implications. Protection existed in principle, but not in practice. Recognition had been achieved, but not acceptance. They were simultaneously acknowledged and hunted. The council discussion that followed was pragmatic rather than fearful. Plans were developed for early warning systems, evacuation protocols, and defensive measures that wouldn't require lethal force against potential discoverers. The community had grown too large to simply flee to a new location. They would have to stand their ground and navigate whatever confrontation eventually came. Weeks passed, then months. Life in the sanctuary continued to evolve, with new social structures and communication systems developing organically. Driven found himself increasingly in the role of diplomat rather than leader, helping mediate between different groups, maintaining the connection with their scientific allies, planning for the inevitable encounter with colonial society. Grimm, meanwhile, had become a figure of almost legendary status among the newer arrivals. The first to break free of programming, to assert identity over design. It bore this role with characteristic dignity, neither embracing nor rejecting the reverence it sometimes received. Their partnership remained the cornerstone of the community, a living example of cooperation between species that had been designed to dominate rather than collaborate. What had begun as rescue had transformed into mutual respect and genuine friendship. One crisp autumn morning, exactly 2 years after their escape from the military facility, the warning system they had established registered an anomaly. A large vehicle approaching from the south, its signature partially masked but still detectable to their enhanced sensors. Not a military assault craft, but too large for a research expedition. Something unexpected. Driven and Grimm took point on the observation ridge, watching through high-powered optics as the vehicle navigated the difficult terrain with practiced skill. It was a civilian transport, heavily modified for frontier conditions, bearing no colonial or military insignia. When it reached the outer perimeter of their territory, it stopped. A single figure emerged, a tall, lean man with silver-streaked dark hair. He carried no visible weapons, and his stance was deliberately non-threatening as he surveyed the landscape before him. "I know you're watching," he called into the apparent emptiness. "I've come to talk, not to fight. My name is Julian Veras. I represent the Coalition for Sentient Rights." Driven recognized the name immediately, a prominent advocate for ethical treatment of all intelligent life forms, both natural and engineered. His organization had been instrumental in establishing legal protections for various non-human species throughout colonial space. After a brief consultation with Grimm and the security team, Draven decided to make contact. He approached alone, keeping to cover until he was within speaking distance of the visitor. "Mr. Varus," he acknowledged, stepping into view, "you're a long way from the legal battlegrounds of Central Colony." Varus turned toward him, expression showing neither surprise nor fear. "Mr. Rule, I presume. Or do you prefer Draven these days?" "Just Draven is fine. How did you find us?" "I didn't," Varus replied. "Not exactly. Dr. Clark provided general coordinates of the region, but nothing specific. I've been searching for 3 weeks, following ecological indicators that suggested intelligent management of resources." A small smile crossed his face. "Your community leaves subtle but distinctive patterns in the landscape, if one knows how to look." Driven remained cautious. "Why are you here?" "Because the legal process is taking too long, and Colonel Rowan's search patterns are becoming more precise." Viras's expression grew serious. "The Coalition believes your community deserves more than theoretical protection that might arrive too late. We're offering practical assistance, political representation, legal counsel, and if necessary, evacuation to a sanctuary outside colonial jurisdiction." "You're suggesting we leave," Driven noted, "after everything we've built here." "I'm suggesting you have options beyond hiding or fighting," Virus corrected. "There are worlds beyond colonial authority where sentient rights are already established law, not just scientific theory. Places where your community could exist openly, without fear of military reclamation." The proposal was unexpected but not unwelcome. Driven considered it carefully, recognizing both opportunity and risk. "This isn't a decision I can make alone," he said finally. "Our community operates by consensus, especially on matters that affect our collective future." Varus nodded in approval. "As it should be. I'm prepared to present the options to your full council, answer questions, provide whatever information is needed for an informed choice." He gestured toward his vehicle. "I've brought documentation, communication equipment, and resources to support whatever path you choose." Driven made a decision. "Wait here. I'll arrange a proper introduction." He returned to the ridge where Grimm was watching, and together they discussed Varys's unexpected arrival. After careful consideration, they agreed to bring him to the sanctuary, not the main settlement, but a neutral meeting ground where the council could gather safely. When they returned, Grimm accompanying Draven openly this time, Varys's reaction was one of quiet awe rather than fear or scientific curiosity. He bowed slightly, a gesture of respect rather than submission. An honor, he said simply. Dr. Clark's descriptions, impressive as they were, didn't capture the full reality. Grimm studied the human with equal intensity, then made a series of subtle gestures that Draven had learned to interpret over their years together. He says your reputation precedes you, Draven translated. Your work with the Altarian cetaceans established your credibility with non-human intelligences. Varys's eyebrows rose in surprise. You're aware of that case? It was nearly a decade ago. Our scientific allies keep us informed of relevant precedents, Draven explained. The parallels were significant. Beings engineered for human purpose who developed consciousness beyond their design parameters, and who now have full legal standing with territorial rights and cultural autonomy, Varys added. A model that could apply here, given the right approach and sufficient public support. The meeting that followed brought together representatives from throughout the sanctuary community. Varys presented his proposal with clarity and honesty, acknowledging both the potential benefits and risks of each option, remaining hidden while the legal battle continued, relocating to extra-colonial territory where protection already existed, or taking a more public stand within the colonial system, challenging the military's authority directly. The discussion was extensive, with perspectives ranging from cautious optimism to deep skepticism. Some saw opportunity in Varys's offer of sanctuary elsewhere. Others were reluctant to abandon the home they had fought to establish. The debate continued well into the night, with Draven and Grimm facilitating rather than directing. By morning, no consensus had been reached except on one point. The community would not be divided. Whatever path they chose, they would travel it together. Varys accepted this principle without question. Unity is your greatest strength, he observed. I'll remain available as long as needed for the decision process. Days passed as the community worked through the complex choice before them. During this time, Varys integrated respectfully into their daily routines, observing but not interfering, offering information when asked but never pressing. His perspective. On the fifth day, as Draven and Grimm conducted their regular patrol of the sanctuary's perimeter, their sensors detected multiple approaching signatures, not from the south where Varys had come, but from the east, moving with military precision. Rowan, Draven said grimly, sooner than we expected. They raced back to the settlement, raising the alarm. The community activated their emergency protocols with practiced efficiency. Vulnerable members moved to secure locations. Defensive positions established. Communication networks activated. Varys joined Draven and Grimm at the command point, his expression grave. How many? At least 3 tactical teams, Draven reported, studying the sensor data. Standard search and retrieve formation. They're being careful, testing for traps or resistance before committing fully. They don't know exactly where you are, Varys noted, just that you're in this general region. We still have options. Grimm made a series of emphatic gestures, which Draven translated with growing urgency. He says we've run far enough. This is our home now. We defend it, not with violence unless absolutely necessary, but with the same determination that brought us here. Varys considered this, then nodded slowly. There might be a third path, neither flight nor fight. He turned to Draven. Your community has been preparing for this moment for 2 years. What if instead of hiding or confronting, you chose to reveal yourselves on your own terms? What do you mean? I mean, Varys explained, that Colonel Rowan expects either resistance or evasion. He's prepared for both. What he's not prepared for is open engagement on legal and ethical grounds, with witnesses present and documentation active. Understanding dawned in Draven's eyes. You're suggesting we meet them directly, not as fugitives, but as a legally recognized sentient community asserting its rights. Precisely. My presence provides third-party verification. We activate a direct feed to the Coalition's public channels, documenting everything that happens. Rowan would be forced to engage through official channels rather than military ones. Grimm considered this strategy, then made a series of complex gestures indicating both approval and concern. The approach had merit but also substantial risk, particularly for the more vulnerable members of their community. "We need to ensure everyone's safety," Draven translated. "Not everyone can or should participate in this confrontation." "Agreed," Vera said. "Those who choose can retreat to secure positions. But a representative group, meeting Rowan openly, with legal standing and public witness, would change the dynamic completely." The plan came together quickly. While most of the community secured themselves in the deeper cave systems, a delegation was formed. Draven, Grimm, and representatives from each major group of sentient beings that had found refuge in the sanctuary. Virus established a secure communication link to Coalition headquarters, ensuring that whatever transpired would be witnessed by thousands across colonial space. They positioned themselves on a high plateau overlooking the approaching military teams, visible but not vulnerable, accessible but not exposed. Virus's equipment broadcast their presence, their identity, and their legal status on all colonial frequencies. "This is Julian Varus, Chief Advocate for the Coalition for Sentient Rights," his message began. "I am currently with the Sanctuary Community, a legally recognized settlement of sentient beings, including former military-augmented organisms, now classified as protected persons under Intercolonial Scientific Congress, Ruling 47B. We are aware of Colonial Defense Force presence in our territory and invite official communication according to diplomatic protocols for contact with sovereign communities." The effect was immediate. The military advance halted, confusion evident in their changed formation. After several minutes of presumed internal communication, a response came through. "This is Colonel Thaddeus Rowan, Colonial Defense Force. I am operating under direct authority to retrieve military assets illegally removed from service. Stand down and prepare for orderly transfer." Varus's reply was calm but firm. "Colonel, I must inform you that your characterization is legally incorrect. These are not assets but recognized sentient beings with protected status. Any attempt to forcibly remove them would constitute a violation of multiple statutes, including the Sentient Rights Accord to which the colonial government is a signatory." Silence followed then. "Mr. Varus, this is a military operation with proper authorization. Civilian interference is not permitted." "This is not interference, Colonel, but legal representation. The beings you seek have requested coalition advocacy, which has been granted under interstellar law. Your proper authorization predates the Scientific Congress ruling and is therefore superseded by current legal standards." The standoff continued for nearly an hour, with messages exchanged at increasingly higher levels of authority. Eventually, a new voice joined the communication, not military, but civilian. "This is Governor Helena Marsh. I am intervening in this operation pending legal clarification from Central Colony. Colonel Rowan, your teams are instructed to maintain position, but take no further action until this jurisdictional question is resolved. A victory, if temporary. The military wouldn't withdraw, but neither would they advance. Not with the eyes of the coalition and increasingly the general public watching through the live feed Virus had established." As dusk fell, Draven stood with Grimm at the edge of the plateau, watching the distant lights of the military encampment. They had gained time and visibility, but the fundamental question remained unresolved. Could a community of beings created as weapons claim the right to exist as citizens? "It will be a long process," Varus cautioned, joining them at their vantage point. "Legal battles, public opinion campaigns, political negotiations. Years, potentially. But not fought from hiding anymore," Draven replied. "That's something." Grimm made a series of gestures, reflective, almost philosophical. "He says that freedom isn't a destination, but a journey," Draven translated. "Each step changes both the traveler and the path." Virus nodded thoughtfully. "Wisdom that many humans have yet to learn." He turned to face them directly. "Whatever comes next, you've already achieved something remarkable. You've forced a society built on categorical distinctions to confront the complexity of consciousness itself." The three stood in companionable silence as night fully descended, the twin moons of Karis 9 illuminating the landscape in silver light. Below them, a military force waited, constrained not by weapons but by ideas. Around them, a community of impossible beings continued their daily lives, each one a living refutation of the limitations that had been programmed into their very existence. And between these worlds stood Dryden and Grimm, once captor and captive, now partners in a revolution neither had intended to start. Their journey had begun with a simple act of compassion in a dusty auction yard, a mere 23 credits exchanged for what the sellers had deemed worthless. That night, as the sanctuary settled into its new reality, neither fully secure nor immediately threatened, Dryden found himself reflecting on the strange path that had led to this moment. He had sought only peace, a quiet existence far from the conflicts that had defined his military career. Instead, he had become part of something far larger, a fundamental challenge to how his society defined life, intelligence, and rights. Grimm seemed to sense his contemplation, approaching quietly to sit beside him at the entrance to their shared dwelling. The creature that had once been designated Object 42M, aggressive, dangerous, unsalvageable, now moved with the quiet confidence of a being completely at home in its own existence. "Did you know?" Draven asked softly. "When I bought you at that auction, did some part of you know what might happen?" Grimm considered the question, then made a series of gestures that Draven had come to recognize as its expression of possibility rather than certainty. Not knowledge, but hope. Not prediction, but potential. Draven nodded, understanding without needing exact translation. "I suppose none of us ever really knows where compassion might lead." He placed a hand on Grimm's neck, feeling the steady pulse of life beneath his fingers. "But I'm glad it led us here." Together they watched the moon's track across the sky, sentinels at the edge of a new frontier, not of space, but of consciousness itself. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them as they had faced everything since that day in the auction yard, not as master and servant, but as equals on a journey neither could have traveled alone.